we'll go ahead and call to order the Longmont Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for May 17th, 2023. First item is a roll call.
Chairman Poland,
Here.
Commissioner Boone. Here. Commissioner Goldberg. Here. Commissioner Flagg. Here. Commissioner Lukacs. Here. Councilmember Rodriguez. Here. Chairman, you have a quorum. Sorry, Commissioner Saunders. Thank you. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item is communications from Planning Director Glenn Van Nimwegen.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to recommend that we take something on order.
The mic.
I'd like to recommend we take some items out of order, particularly 7A, and move it up on the agenda.
7A or 7B?
B.
Okay. Do we have somebody who would like to bring forth a motion to move the agenda item 7B to the next item on our agenda? And Commissioner Flagg?
So moved.
Oh. Okay.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Commissioner Boone seconds. So we have a motion on the table to move item 7A to the next item on our meeting list.
7B.
7B. And I think we are ready to take a vote then.
Commissioner Boone.
Yes.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Yes.
Chairman Poland.
Yes.
Commissioner Flagg.
Yes.
Commissioner Lukacs.
Yes.
Commissioner Saunders.
Yes.
Chairman, that passes 6-0.
Okay. We'll go ahead and then move item 7B, and that will be the next item on our agenda. Amendment to the Planning and Zoning Commission bylaws. Jeremy Tyrell, Assistant City Attorney, and Glenn Van Nimwegen, Planning Director, to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, Jeremy Terrell, Assistant City Attorney with the Longmont City Attorney's Office. I'm here today to recommend that we consider a bylaw change to the Planning and Zoning Commission bylaws. Specifically, the change concerns public invited to be heard comments during Planning and Zoning Commission. At various times, Planning and Zoning Commission is required to conduct quasi-judicial hearings. During these hearings, the commissioners must act like a court of law and judges in a court of law. Accordingly, the commissioners cannot consider ex parte communications. Our concern is that ex parte communications may be made during public invited to be heard portions of public meetings. These comments should not be considered by the commission when the commission's ultimately ruling on that quasi-judicial matter. So accordingly, we're recommending a change that gives the chair discretion to instruct speakers during public invited to be heard to prohibit or stop their comments on matters that may be before the commission on ex parte, on quasi-judicial proceedings. This is consistent with various other jurisdictions. It complies with the First Amendment according to the City Attorney's Office. And then certainly members of the public can still bring their comments during the public hearing on the quasi-judicial matter. And the reason why we need this change is just to ensure the due process rights of applicants along with the public. Ex parte communications don't provide the applicant a chance to respond, and the public can't respond to any ex parte communications by the applicant. Is there any questions on this proposed amendment change or proposed bylaw change?
Yes, I actually have one. Will it be made known to the public that during this process, during this period, where they cannot speak on a item coming up before us as quasi-judicial, but that they can submit paperwork to the city, and that is entered into the packet that is given to us, and therefore stuff that we will then read in regards to the item coming before us? Can you kind of talk through that a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, on the proposed bylaw change, if any speaker is prohibited from making a statement, the person prohibiting that speaker should inform the speaker that they may speak at the public hearing, And they may also submit written materials to the executive secretary in advance of the public hearing to be considered by the commission. So we have two different opportunities. The member of the public who is restricted during the public invited to be heard may come to the public hearing on the matter, or they may submit materials to the executive secretary to be included in the administrative record for the commission to consider when it's up for hearing.
Thank you. Commissioner Boone? Sorry, Commissioner Flagg.
Thank you. My question would be in regards to, now, just for clarification, that means that if they submit something during the public to be heard, it doesn't get distributed to us. It gets held by Jane and then delivered to us at the appropriate time and not that night.
Correct. So if a member of the public were to bring in something today concerning a quasi-judicial matter, our instruction from the city attorney's office would be to give it to Jane, the executive secretary, to hold on to and include with the administrative record when the matter comes before the commission. So rather than distributing it at the day of the day of the meeting, it'd be at the public hearing on the matter. You're welcome.
Are there any other comments? Commissioner Goldberg?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Hey, Jeremy. Can we just, there's lots of ex partes and quasi-judicials thrown at us. I think what I'm hearing you say is when we have these quasi-judicial matters that are about to come before us, the public invited to be heard cannot be a forum for us to hear comments about these items that might be coming down the line. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And
Correct.
how long are you saying, when is it too soon for them to be able to talk about their item?
In general, the burden will be on planning staff to alert the commission, to alert the chairman of when an upcoming quasi-judicial matter. The idea is once the application has been filed with planning staff, we're under a quasi-judicial kind of envelope or blanket. We shouldn't have quasi-judicial ex parte communications made to planning and zoning once an application is on file.
Okay, and is that typically 1 month out before it's before P and Z, 2 months out, 3 months out? How can the, public, how can we guide them or level set with them on when they can be heard and when they can't?
I think I'll let Glenn speak to most of that, but I will just like to add that I know staff at Planning and Development has been doing outreach to organizations
Yeah.
to let them know that, ex parte communications during public invited to be heard is not appropriate. Please save it for the public hearing. And our plan is to have staff continue to do public outreach to citizen groups.
Okay.
And to answer your other question, Commissioner Goldberg, it could be a number of months. It could be 6 months, possibly 9 months, because anything that you would be seeing as a major application is going through Development Review Committee. So that takes some time before it's ready to present to you. So as Jeremy mentioned, we talked about it in staff, and we need to put actually in those review comments, you are not to be coming before the commission or the council. Now that hits the applicant, so we're gonna have a cheat sheet down here, so if it's something you know nothing about and somebody says, apple tree orchard, I wanna complain about that, we can give you the timeout sign.
Okay, so thank you, Glenn. As part of these processes, there's multiple times when we reach out to the community meetings, neighborhood feedback, that sort of stuff. Signs go up, in an area where there's going to be a proposal for a development. Should it say on that signage, like, hey, community, there's a proposal going in this area. Don't come down and talk about it. This is officially no bueno. I understand that we can communicate it to the applicant easily. I'm a little bit concerned about the public's perception when they come down for public invited to be heard and then they get the kibosh, So what can we do to educate the public about, hey, we know you're passionate about this, but now isn't the time. It's actually going to be a little bit later when we discuss your project.
Right, I think the best opportunity would be at that neighborhood meeting to make that clear. We can also make it a part of our mailings. Whenever we get an application, we send it out to everyone within 1,000 feet. So we can incorporate something in that as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think what I don't want to have happen is for there to be some perception from the community that we're removing their opportunity to offer their feedback. You know, I think that's a really critical part of our experience here. I don't think you're taking it away. I think we're just further defining when is the right time to do it. Jeremy, when is according to what you have before us today, when would it go into effect? Are we looking to make something to approve this new rule to go into effect today or in a month or starting 2024? What's the proposal here?
Our recommendation would be today.
Okay.
Our proposed amendment went out in compliance with our current bylaws. So our recommendation is that the commission consider it today and approve it today and adopt the rule in effect today.
Okay. And then have we been notifying there's several members of the public here today. Have we communicated to folks on upcoming projects that this might be going into effect today?
We made contact with one particular group today, at least one of the members of the group. But, you know, certainly, you know, with this new bylaw change, there's going to be some growing pains. Because, for example, the commission considers some things as quasi-judicial matters. Other times, there are legislative recommendations to city council. So, for example, annexation. Annexation's always a legislative decision by city council, and there's no ex parte communication or quasi-judicial concerns with annexation applications before planning and zoning. So, for example, if a member of the public wanted to speak today about an annexation matter, they're free to. The quasi-judicial comes into effect only in certain circumstances, and the specific examples identified in the packet included preliminary subdivision plats, rezoning applications, conditional use applications, and variance applications. So there would be some growing pains, certainly.
Sure.
And we'll do our best working with staff to help identify quasi-judicial versus legislative matters to public groups. But there'll be some growing pains, unfortunately.
Okay, Jeremy. I'm tracking so far, and I apologize to the commission for the questions. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. There's a big project that might be coming before us down the line in association with the Bond Farm neighborhood. Would that qualify as one of those projects where we could not talk about it now?
Yes, it would qualify as a quasi-judicial matter because we're applying a set criteria to the consideration of the application.
Sure.
And when there's a set criteria, it's not an objective standard. It's an objective standard, not a subjective standard. So that would be a quasi-judicial matter for PZ along with City Council.
Okay. And when we make our vote today, that becomes in effect immediately, not after midnight tonight, not after the close of the meeting. What we're suggesting here is that anyone who came to speak on behalf of one of these items that meet these criteria would not be able to speak to us today, before or after the close, for the first or second public invited to be heard section.
Correct.
Okay. I don't like it.
Jeremy, could you, or excuse me, Glenn, could you give a rough time frame for a project from the time, let's say, the public would have the first notification that something is happening to a piece of property? Kind of what are the steps? So a piece of property is going to be developed, some stuff kind of happens, then a neighborhood meeting occurs, and kind of what's that timeline between the neighborhood meeting and the time that the paperwork is officially submitted to the city?
Yes, I wish I could give you a real set days, but we require the neighborhood meeting before they make an application because we want them to take input early on and perhaps change their application before they make the formal application to us. Prior to that, I guess I would say pre-app, they meet with staff and we go over what the issues are, what the process is. But then they have a neighborhood meeting. They go through, they make an application, they go through design review committee reviews. That's basically it. 6 to 9 months is normal.
Commissioner Saunders? Oh,
Am I going now? Okay, thank you. Chair Poland, thank you. I am a little bit uncomfortable with this for several reasons. Before I was a volunteer on planning and zoning, I was a volunteer on Parks and Rec Advisory Board. I was a volunteer on Neighborhood Group Leaders Association, a volunteer on my HOA board. One of the most powerful tools that we have is public invited to be heard. So I'm very protective of it. So a couple of things that I draw issue with are, in the document that you sent us, it says Section 8, proceeding of meetings. It's proceeding of regular meetings, correct? It's in the red line one that you sent, the second one.
Yes, Commissioner.
So this is meant for business meetings, right? For regular meetings?
Let's make sure we're looking at the same document, just
Yeah.
one moment.
Sure. It looks like this.
Yes, I'm looking at that, but I'm pulling up the original bylaws to
Okay.
show. So there,
So sections.
it's a
10.
modification to section 10 of the 2023 Planning and Zoning bylaws,
the one
which
you-
is titled Proceedings of Meetings. Just
Yeah, so that would be regular meetings, because the second section has work study meetings, right? Work session meetings.
correct. It would be under section
Perfect.
10A.
So I want to make sure that we're talking about the right one.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so in that, it says the public invited to be heard are intended to provide members of the public an opportunity to address the commission at the beginning or end of the meeting on matters that are, and this is my underlined part, are not on the commission's agenda for that meeting. So to me, that intent provides equal access to people, right? So when we get our packets of our agenda, it's on a Thursday, it's 5 or 6 days. And so public invited to be heard gives the opportunity to come to any meeting to talk about whatever's coming up. If I have a job on Wednesday nights and I don't have 5 or 6 days to take off to come and talk on an agenda that I only know happens on Thursday, the access for people to come and talk about that agenda item is really narrow. So I have issue for that particular part of it. It seems to take away that equal access of citizens to come and talk about things that maybe they don't get to schedule for that project. And then for the quasi judicial hearing, those are for development review apps specifically, right? But we're not always a quasi judicial board, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the time limited part that was brought up by Commissioner Goldberg, I have big issue with that because if you started at the application, there are applications that are in the queue since 2017. And so that blocks them out for a really long time, and that makes it very challenging for people to access. Another thing I have, there's several listed, so I'm just gonna put them out there for us to discuss. The chairman has sole discretion, which I have a big issue with. Commissioner Pullen is amazing, and we think that he's fair, but we don't wanna have these written in stone and not have someone, that maybe is fair-minded. And then the speaker is being prohibited in written materials. And for me, it seems like this catalyst for this is about maybe more the written materials part versus the opinion part for me. So if, let's say hypothetically, a group came and presented documents during public invited to be heard, and we've had this on PRAB too, it seems like those pieces of documentation or slideshow become facts not in evidence, and it's confusing to the application. However, if those documents are presented on record during public invited to be heard, then they get collected and they become part of the packet. So then the applicant and the commission has that opportunity to respond to those issues. So I feel like the process already works, and I have a lot of concerns with many of these issues going forward. So I'm not in favor of this as it's written.
Commissioner Flagg?
Am I good? Wait. Thank you, Chair. My concern is going back to the last meeting when there was a full-blown PowerPoint presentation and we got stack of material. It was as if they were presenting for a public hearing. And to me, that crossed the line of saying, this is my opinion of what should happen in my neighborhood. And there's a way, I think, that they can be heard, but without this full-blown presentation. To me, that was not a public to be heard. I'm presenting our arguments before you even get a chance to see what the submittal might be. So that's like a tainting of the waters. And to me, that goes too far. So I appreciate this. I'm hopeful that we'll pass something like this because we're getting to the point where they're trying to push in a way that, to me, is unethical.
Jeremy, I do have a question.
Yes.
From a legal standpoint, and I believe that's what kind of generated this to begin with. With what, if the public comes before us and speaks on an item that's quasi judicial before the date of the hearing, and let's say hypothetically, we end up not approving the applicant's request, legally what might happen? I'm trying to get to why,
Yes.
why all of a sudden, why all the interest in putting this and getting it in?
Right, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, it ultimately comes down to constitutional and due process protections. So, in certain matters where it's quasi-judicial, there are due process and constitutional protections. In general, there has to be notice of a public hearing on the matter. The applicant has to have an opportunity to confront or cross-examine anyone who makes comments against the project, and the public also has a right to be heard on that project. And most importantly, or perhaps one of the most important factors, is the commission must be fair-minded and not prejudge the application. If there's any sense of prejudgment by the commissioners, that opens up the city to liability in the future, because now that project has a taint on it, that if the applicant's application was denied, that applicant could pursue a judicial remedy to have it overturned based on a prejudgment or a bias by the commission. And that's really the concern right there, is that a statement made by members of the public or even the applicant outside the public hearing could be seen as swaying the commission or swaying the commissioners and helping them and showing that they're prejudging the application, which would then result in a district court action, which could result in the city being paid, having to pay attorney fees and costs, not to mention the fact that the application would have to go back to the original step and have to be redone.
Commissioner Goldberg?
I didn't write my notes down yet. Thank you, Chairman. Jeremy, man, I really, first of all, just to, what is the ringing? Just to kind of follow up on some of my peers here, I appreciate Commissioner Saunders' perspective and the value of the public invited to be heard and the importance of it. And I uphold those same values. That said, I'm also open to identifying, sometimes we have quasi-judicial issues, which I think may be different from some of the Park and Rec discussions. And these unique scenarios may require unique holding, and behavior. So I can come along with that. I also hear Commissioner Saunders on her concerns around it needing to be unbiased. It can't be subjective. It can't be Chairman Poland saying yes today but no to someone else next month. So I can be down with the idea. I feel like what you've told me already is that Glenn's going to have a list on his sheet right there, and if someone comes up and starts talking about a hot item that's going to be before us, it's actually not the chairman's decision. It's staff has said, or even you as the attorney has said, I'm sorry, we just can't address this item today. So I could get to a good point with approving it conceptually, identifying that there's a few times, there are scenarios where we just need to be more delicate and intentional with how we handle the public invited to be heard. And while I appreciate Commissioner Flake's perspective, actually, I don't really care about the packet that gets distributed or not. I'm happy to receive it, and this is kind of like the modern day, and if people want to have a presentation, as long as it's not during this narrow window when we're not supposed to be talking about an item, you got 5 minutes. If you want to spend the 5 minutes walking through your slides versus reading off of your note in front of me, I don't care. So I can be on board with that. I'll tell you my biggest rub. It's that we're doing it today and for today specifically. In my world, we can make a decision and make it starting tomorrow, starting at midnight tonight. But I think out of respect for the folks who are here today, if we haven't already had these discussions with them in advance, then I'm concerned about making a rule right now that obviously impacts them, and they just didn't have any awareness. There's all sorts of reasons why I don't like it. So that's just my 2 cents, and I'll just kind of put it back to the rest of the commission for their POV. And Jeremy, if you have any other feedback.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Goldberg, if I could just add a little commentary on the timing. It's my understanding this issue has never come up in recent history concerning planning and zoning. So the matter first came to our attention during the last meeting where ex parte communications were held in great detail and materials were passed out to the commission. So at that point, the planning director, myself, and our city attorney all worked collaboratively to come up with a solution to that problem that came up last month. So unfortunately, based on our current bylaws, our hands were kind of tied in terms of what we could do. And we were uncomfortable informing citizen groups about a possible bylaw change until the commission had an opportunity to vote on it. So it kind of cuts both ways. We didn't want to tell citizen groups, don't come to public invite to be heard on quasi-judicial matters because we're going to ban it without having the commissioners have an opportunity to weigh in on it. And to your point, concerning other boards, I will say that Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council are essentially only 2 boards where this concern will come up. Every other board and commission under the City of Longmont, for the most part, is an advisory board. Since Planning and Zoning and City Council are both decision-making bodies, that's where the quasi-judicial problem happens. And I can, at this point, I can inform the commissioners that a similar change to City Council rules and procedure will be addressed at the next City Council meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking about the effective date, when we get applications, aren't they effective starting at midnight of that day, night? They're not effective immediately, like the next second.
I would say it's immediately. When we get a full application and it's accepted and put into our system, it's good to go. There isn't a waiting period or anything.
Like with applications, I know there's an appeal period, right, for a month or so, right? But in this case, we don't have any public to, we don't give them the opportunity to voice any concern about this.
There is an appeal after the commission takes action.
Right.
That wouldn't change.
So there will be an appeal period for, let's say we vote this tonight. There will be an appeal period?
On this item, I'm sorry. On this particular bylaw item, is there an appeal?
I don't believe there'd be a right to appeal this particular decision. So the process would be that the bylaw change would go into effect, and then an aggrieved party would have to file a challenge to the decision in district court.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm just concerned, just like some of my fellow commissioners, about the item that we have on the agenda all the time is the public invited to be heard. And that's where everyone has been sending people when they have a concern, right? Even if I talk with someone, socially, and I hear about something, okay, I can't talk about this, right? And I invite them to come and talk about it here publicly. So we're sending people to come here, but but you can't talk about it here. So it's, and I understand why you're proposing this and partly agree, but at the same time, how do we still give people a choice and a voice?
If I may, Commissioner, I think the
Yes.
choice and the voice comes during public hearing. And while I recognize Commissioner Saunders' point that, it's hard for people to come here on certain days of the week and certain times, our rules and bylaws still allow for public comments to be made to the executive secretary to be included in the record. So if a member of the public can't come to the public hearing on Bond Farm, they could send an email, they can send a letter to the principal planner associated with the project. they could send the email or letter to Jane, and then we'll make sure it's included in the administrative record for the commission to consider when it comes before public hearing. Again, and this is just limited to quasi-judicial actions. So legislative functions, changes to the land development code, annexations, all that's still fair game. Those can be brought up during public invited to be heard. It's just these limited quasi-judicial matters that our proposed bylaw change would affect. And I will note that if the commission is uncomfortable making it effective tonight, our prior guidance on the matter would still apply. So that means that any public invited to be heard comments concerning a quasi-judicial matter should be ignored by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So any materials that are provided should not be considered when it comes before Planning and Zoning on public hearing. Any comments made should not be considered by the commissioners when it comes to public hearing.
But aren't we saying that they can still bring and give it to the secretary?
Absolutely, they can still give it to the secretary
So it will
today.
still count when the application will come to us?
It will still count in the sense that an item given today should not be passed out to the commissioners today.
Okay.
It should go to Jane to be passed out and included in the packet when it comes up for public hearing.
Okay.
Thanks. Chairman, I have Assistant City Attorney Jeremy Tyrell. I just it's important to remember that you're speaking as our legal guidance here. Are we, if we don't pass this today, are we putting the city and or the Bond Farm project and any other future candidate like that at risk? Let me back up my question. I'm frustrated. I wish we had public invited to be heard first, and then we handle this in the order that it was listed on our agenda, because now I feel like we're duping our public. But are you saying that if we open up public invited to be heard today, and we were to hear about Bond Farm, I know there's several people in the audience who would like to talk about it, are we compromising the integrity of the Bond Farm application and review when it comes to us later?
Yes. I would, at this point, without speaking on attorney-client privilege matters, which would be done in executive session and things of that nature, an argument can be made that even the comments last month could have jeopardized the application and the due process rights of the applicant, along with the public.
Okay, yeah, just kind of level setting with my peers here. It's frustrating. I don't like how it's gone down, but what I'm hearing is that, I agree with almost all of it, and I'm just frustrated with the process today. But high level, this is very important. This is, forgive me, Jeremy, you said other municipalities take this behavior for quasi-judicial items.
Yes, this exact language actually came, I believe, from Commerce City.
Okay.
So Commerce City has this very similar bylaw for city council along with their planning and zoning commission.
Cool. Okay. Conceptually, I'm favorable to it. There's one or two little wordsmithing that I think we could do to decide who actually makes the decision, whether it's staff or chair or the city attorney's office. I wish the applicant and the public today could be heard, but that said, what's more important than that is maintaining the integrity of that project when it comes before us, and not jeopardizing the integrity of this commission and the projects that we see and the applications that we see. So from that perspective, I'm supportive of it.
Commissioner Saunders.
Thank you, Chair Poland. Jeremy, I have a few follow-up questions, and thank you for your due diligence on keeping us within the law. I'm surprised that it's come up so recently. I'm a little surprised at how quickly it's happening as well, and that shocks me and worries me. So when you say ex parte, is that outside of record or outside of public hearing?
Outside of the record.
So public invited to be heard is on the record.
It's outside the record of the public hearing.
So it's both.
I
It's
guess,
during the hearing, but it's also on record, right? Because when we're streaming this on YouTube, everyone can see it, right? And I appreciate that you're trying to keep us unbiased, but that's pretty difficult. You know, we read and we are on social media and we live in this space. And so we know what's going on. And so to have such a sanitary view of it also bothers me. Can you tell me a little bit more about the city council write-up and what that looks like? Specifically to, are they separating out the documents versus the opinions? For me, it seems like there's two separate issues. It's coming and talking about how you may feel about a certain project coming up versus giving documentation for the public hearing.
Yes, just one moment.
Sure. And my follow-up would be, did they have time to work on this wording as well? Because I did not personally have any time to work on this or wordsmith this with the commission. I don't know if anybody else did, or they just were given, this is what we're doing.
So I can say that city council has not considered the rule change yet. It'll be before city council on this Tuesday for first reading.
Okay,
And consistent with city council bylaws, the rule has to be made, the rule will be introduced on Tuesday of next week, and they'll vote on it the following week. And that's consistent with their required bylaws, that there's a first reading and then a vote.
yeah. And did they have an opportunity to work on this during a study session?
No,
So they were given similar language?
yes,
Do you mind reading it to me?
sure, just one moment. So I'll try to read this.
Yeah, sorry for putting you on the spot, Jeremy.
No, it's okay.
Appreciate you doing that.
Absolutely. So during, and this will be an amendment to citizen participation rule of procedure 5. During the public invited be heard segments of council meetings and to ensure due process protections, city council may prohibit public statements on upcoming matters where council may hold a quasi-judicial hearing. The chair has the discretion to direct a speaker to terminate all remarks on upcoming matters where the council may hold a quasi-judicial hearing. A speaker prohibited from making a statement on such a matter may speak at any public quasi-judicial hearing on that matter. Alternatively, prior to any public quasi-judicial hearing, a speaker may submit written materials to the city staff assigned to the matter for inclusion in the administrative record that council will consider when making its decision. And again, this language has not been introduced to city council yet. It's on the agenda, it's included in the packet for next Tuesday's meeting, but city council has not yet provided any sort of guidance or feedback on that rule change.
And
at
they'll
this
see
point.
it Thursday when they get their packet.
They'll see it, yes.
Okay, so they'll have a few days to work on it. Okay, so I would be a little more comfortable waiting to see their feedback on their document. Ours seems a little bit more robust than city council does. So I'm trying to hone in on the documents part versus verbal opinions part. Right, so where is the line saying that I don't like XYZ happening versus the far other end of the extreme of I'm providing, you know, some documentation, past research? Like where's the line gonna sit then? Right, versus I'm just giving my opinion about not liking this project going forward. Do we have a line there
I
at
apologize, I'm not
all?
sure I understand the question.
When someone comes to talk at public invited to be heard, and they're just giving their opinion. But there's also documentation. To me, there seems to be some sort of spectrum of it, right? Or is it just, I can't talk about the address at 12345 Atwood? Because it started an application in 2004 for, you know, a plot or an annexation and it's now 2045, and I haven't been able to say anything ever about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Atwood.
I think the line will come down to whether it's a comment on the specific application that will be before planning and zoning. So for example, if, I know that's not a
tricky.
great
Well,
answer.
that's hard because
Yes.
like not everybody knows the process, right? And it changes and it's fluid and, you know, and that is, again, limiting the access for public invited to be heard and public understanding of the process and to be able to speak their mind about their city.
I agree.
Okay,
It's,
so yeah, so that's what I'm trying to get to. So I think it would be easier for me to digest this if there were some better outline of, can people still come and talk about just about anything they want, except for, you know, that very specific thing that's in the queue, if you will, right? And I get that. I get we can't tarnish that. It's a case. We're on jury. We can't have this extra evidence. I get that. But I'm trying to compartmentalize that piece so that public can understand it. Planning and zoning, I don't know if you guys know this, it's tricky business. It's really hard. I don't want to make it more complicated for people. I want them to be able to still come and speak their mind about their properties and their places. And I mean, that's the whole reason I'm here. And that's how I think we get people volunteering on these boards. So for me, what would help me to be more comfortable with this, if that is outlined, and like Commissioner Goldberg is saying, like if that is outlined, also like what is the director's position? Because I don't see that anywhere in this language that director is going to have a list. I also am really concerned about that timeline and when it's going to start and end. Because if you go back in there and you see some of these applications, they're still sitting there, you know, for whatever reason. Yeah, so I think I would need a time ending. I need some more specifics based on the comments you got back here, and maybe we can see it in 30 days for some feedback instead of pulling the trigger right now. That would be my recommendation, because all I see is approve or reject. I don't see any conditions or abilities to do that.
Glenn?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Saunders, our applications are good for 1 year. So anything that's a major application that would be a quasi-judicial isn't sitting out there for several years. Now, you could look at our project list, and there could be some administrative projects that are in for multiple years, and more than likely, we just haven't closed it out. But you wouldn't see a quasi-judicial project sitting out there for years.
Yeah. Oh, no, I think I can do this.
Yeah, sorry, operator. Thank you, Chair Poland. Can that bit, the specifics, be written in there then before this feels broad scope to me, and it's very quick and only having a few days to look at it. I'd like to hear what council says on their end of their bit, and to have some of these issues about the time frame, what types of applications. So major applications are different than the administrative applications, and some that go through. And I think that's going to help the public understand what things they can come and talk to us about. Also, it should be written in there where the documents go, right, for that case. If it's a major application and you're going to provide some documentation, it doesn't come to public invited to be heard. It goes straight to admin. Can those types of things be written into the way it is now?
I don't know that anybody would read it in your bylaws, if that's what
I
you're
would.
asking.
I would, and I think other people would too, because that's why they're there, right? To give guidance to the citizens and to give guidance to future board members. As I'm a nerd, I watch the videos. I'm sorry, I do, and I look through the bylaws, and that's where I get my direction and how to function on a commission or advisory board. So I'll let the other commissioners put their 2 cents in on that.
Commissioner Flagg?
Do I have to push this?
Nope.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned with putting this off based on the experience from last meeting. And I even would like us to go so far as to say, please don't bring your videos, please don't bring your slides for public wanting to be heard. Yes, I think the public needs to be able to be heard, but we've been an audience sort of to presentations that have crossed the line repeatedly. Last meetings was way over the line, in my opinion, because it felt like they were presenting a side and not allowing the applicant to present a side. And there is a way, I think, for the public to come and say, here's what I want for my neighborhood, without ever once mentioning a development plan. They can figure out, if they're smart enough to put all that planning wisdom together to bring it as part of public wanting to be heard, they can certainly figure out a way to say, here's what my neighborhood needs, without addressing a project. There's a way to do that, but I would like to see something done this evening so that we don't have to have another meeting and be exposed to that.
Thanks, Chairman. I think to Commissioner Saunders' concern about really categorizing which, what items we're discussing, I find comfort in the fact that this is isolated to quasi-judicial items. Now, if you're looking at the bylaws, you might not know what quasi-judicial is, and that's a little bit on you. You might discover when you come down here, oh shoot, this is a quasi-judicial item. I gotta wait a few months until it's my turn to actually speak. But I find comfort in that's a very defined category, versus what did you call it, like a major project or an administrative project. This is not. This is a quasi-judicial project, and so that gives us some clear guidelines to our public. Jeremy, I'm down to wordsmithing, and when you read, it comes down to the idea of not wanting to give a perception. Can you turn off your mic? That it's up to the chairman. It reads, the chairman has the discretion to direct a speaker. In my mind, it should be, the chairman shall direct a speaker to terminate all remarks on upcoming matters where the commission may hold a quasi-judicial hearing. I don't want it to be up to Michael. I want you or Glenn to have said, hey, these are the 10 items that we can't talk about. They just said it, so he shall terminate, not has the discretion to. But I'm not a lawyer. Is there a reason why we put has the discretion to? Is adding shall problematic from a legal perspective?
Thank you, Commissioner Goldberg. I don't believe that's problematic from a legal perspective. I think the issue came down to perhaps like a comment at the very end of a speaker's comment. So maybe like a speaker comes up and said, I think all doors in the city of Longmont should be green. Mm-hmm. And also, I really hate this particular project. Let me talk about the merits of it.
Yes.
And we don't want to have a situation where we somehow cut that initial part of the public invited to be heard statement off. So I think that's why the city attorney's office, including myself, used the word may prohibit. That being said, I see no legal problem with saying shall prohibit.
Okay. No one thinks I should be writing legal copy here. Glenn, do you have a perspective on the use of shall versus has the discretion to?
No, I don't.
Okay. Yeah, I agree that we have a very talented and wonderful chairman right now, and I hear some of the concerns about it. I just don't want it to be gray. So in my mind, shall is more clear. If the legal team stands by the use of has the discretion to, and that's clear enough, then I can come on board with it. I just want it to be really tight.
Jeremy, I'd even like to go a step further. So it says planning and development services staff shall reasonably inform the chairman of such upcoming matters that are likely to result in extensive public input. Basically indicating there's going to be a list. I think that list should be available actually to all of the commission and even to the public so that they're aware of what is and what is not on the table. Because, I mean, I could even see the thing, something goes into planning and you're like, oh, this is gonna be a year out. Do we really want to prevent public hearing? And I think, you know, it's kind of that fuzzy area, but maybe a little discretion that, you know, if it's gonna be a year out, we don't wanna, I agree, a year out is a long time. You know, when do we have maybe when we have a really good idea of, yeah, this is gonna be coming in front in 6 months, okay, now we can really start. That's kind of where, and I would like a list available, so it's just not even the planning department talking to the chairperson, it's the planning department informing the commission, and if possible, the public. Here are the list of the quasi-judicial items that it's coming before the planning and zoning. If you want to speak to that, you'll have a chance the day of the hearing, and before that, you can address items to the planning department, and they will include that in the packet that's presented to the commission. Once again, emphasizing the fact that even though there may be a blackout period where, oh my gosh, you can't talk about it and the public invited to be heard, you can still collect that information, you can still get it to the planning department, and it will be part of our packet, which to me is the most valuable thing. I mean, that's the thing that we all read and we all go through. And that's what we base, that's partially what we base our decisions on, is what we read in that packet. And it would be very helpful, I think, for the public to know and to reinforce to the public that, hey, you can submit stuff, you can submit your letters, and it goes into our packet, and we read those letters. I don't know, maybe add at the end, a list of qualifying upcoming matters is available from the planning department. I mean, something like that.
I guess I'm concerned about, for instance, we have language in our notice. We could miss somebody in a notice, but the action is still viable that you hold here. I guess I'm just concerned if we miss something on a list. Now, I will tell you, there are other communities, in fact, Thornton, that has this rule in place, does have it on their website. They list out their quasi-judicial. So I'm fairly confident we can do that. I don't know, on the other issue, if we happen to leave something off, is it dead in the water?
Commissioner Goldberg.
Yeah, I think it's all about intention here, Glenn. Well, I don't think we're asking for it to be perfect. What do we do? Do we need to make a recommendation with proposed edits to this copy? At this point, do we move to approve with the understanding that staff and legal will work to button up the copy? Help me out here. How do we make changes to this document if we're not the ones who are going to come up with the final version?
Excellent question. To the extent the commission has specific language they're considering at this point, I think we can include that. So for example, the commission could make a motion to change the second sentence of the first paragraph to say the chairman shall direct a speaker to terminate all remarks on upcoming matters where the commission may hold a quasi-judicial hearing. I think the commission can also make a motion to strike that last sentence of that paragraph. And then planning and development staff can work with the city attorney's office on coming up with a plan for notifying the commission of upcoming quasi-judicial matters, as opposed to that language of shall reasonably inform. We could just strike that in sentence in its entirety.
Or can we say shall reasonably inform the commission?
I think the commission can make any motion it wants to change, to recommend to change the language. And then it'd be on, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I guess I waffle between shall and has the discretion too. I think there's good arguments either way. I'm also, once staff and the attorney's office have worked together to identify proper language, I don't want to muddy it too much. yeah, I guess in the end, I'm reasonably fine with the copy as proposed. I just think it's the burden of the staff and legal team to be on site during the meeting and informing us who should and shouldn't be speaking. And as long as that's garnered, cool. If that means striking the last sentence of the second paragraph, I'm supportive of that, because it's just saying we will not hear matters about upcoming quasi-judicial hearings.
And Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Commissioner, I think I completely agree with you. I mean, for example, planning and zoning had no idea when a quasi-judicial matter is coming up on the agenda, because they're not working in planning development staff as a citizen board. So I think we agree, and the language and the proposed amendment recognize that it's on the burden of planning development services along with the city attorney's office to recognize those upcoming matters.
Okay. Given you're the legal expert here, how would you recommend we proceed with this? Would you recommend approving as is? Would you recommend striking this last sentence of the second paragraph? What's your legal guidance here?
I don't believe it's a legal decision at this point
Okay.
concerning keeping that last sentence in versus striking it. I think the intent, I think whether it remains in there is stricken. I think our plan going forward will still be the same of us working collectively with planning development to come up with a method of informing the commission, even if it's through the chairman.
Okay.
Okay, we're good. Thank you, Chair Poland. I have a quick question, a legal question. So, as far as my understanding is for the commission's bylaws, anyone on the commission can move for an amendment to the bylaws within 5 days. So sort of, if you will, sort of buyer's remorse for this particular bylaw that you're asking us to approve.
So I'm looking at section 16, titled Amending the Bylaws. It simply says these bylaws may be amended at any meeting of Planning and Zoning Commission, provided the notice
Correct,
of said proposed amendment is given to each member in writing at least 5 days prior.
correct.
So I do believe any commissioner, staff member, or member of the public could even propose something
5 days.
in terms of a bylaw, as long
Yeah,
as it's 5 days notice.
Okay, thank you for that, Jeremy.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Do we need clarification on if we're going to go ahead and prove this as is written? Do we have a motion? Commissioner Goldberg.
Jeremy, Glenn. It's with a very raised eyebrow at both of you. Given our discussion here and deliberation as a commission, and given the fact that we've given you our feedback and concerns, and given my faith in city staff and the legal team to uphold our intentions here, and recognizing that city staff and legal representation is on site for all of our meetings, and most privy to what quasi-judicial items are coming before us. Given all of those conditions, those existing conditions, I'll recommend approval of the amendment to the 2023 bylaws as presented to us today.
Can I make a friendly amendment to your motion? That it stays for 30 days before it's enacted?
I'm not interested in accepting that amendment, that condition. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion. Commissioner Flake,
I will second that motion.
we have the motion, we have the second. Any further comment? If not, let's go ahead and take a vote.
Commissioner Boone? Commissioner Goldberg? Chairman Poland? Commissioner Flake? Commissioner Lukacs? Commissioner Saunders? Chairman, that does pass 5-1.
Thank you, Jane. Okay. We will now move to the public invited to be heard. Or wait, I will go back to Glenn, make sure are there any other communications from the planning director?
No, sir.
Okay, we will go ahead, and Jane is getting the list for the public comment invited to be heard. Thank you, Jane. We have a long list here. I will remind the public that with the new bylaw that items, and I guess I can say this, the bond farm is something that will be coming up to us shortly. So items that specifically address the bond farm development will not be allowed to be talked at, the public invited to be heard. If you still want to come up, please do. If you have comments, I will let you know that you can go ahead, put those in writings and submit those to the planning department, to the secretary, and those will be included in our packet. So I will go through the list. The first name on the list is Tom Smith. And once again, you have 5 minutes, and please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Tom Smith. Excuse me again. Tom Smith is my name. I live at 1049 Champion Circle, and I have a kind of an overlapping comment or two to make this evening. I've been here before. I shared with you some information previously about the nature of the surrounding area of Longmont, where we are expanding and growing because of some of the demands on our community. About 2 months ago, I shared with several department heads in the city of Longmont, city manager, Glenn, fire chief, fire marshal, city council people, an example from the Environmental Protection Agency about their community engagement. For about the last 16 months, excuse me, I have wrestled with a couple of community issues related to code enforcement and development. And through those processes, I have learned that there are a large number of challenges to function with as a citizen in the community, to access and gain information as well as engaging. And I don't know how far that went with Councilor Rodriguez or Glenn, but I would encourage that the Department for Planning and several others start to look at changing some of the processes as to how we as citizens work with various entities in the city. The engagement process from the Environmental Protection Agency works through something that simply I describe as a two-way street. What you're dealing with here tonight, unfortunately, in my mind, settles too closely to the adversarial role and relationship that the American judicial system replicates. And I don't think that's the constructive way to develop our community and build things. Mr. Rodriguez would also recall a reference to a book that I suggested people read by the former Surgeon General Murthy that talked about how community people engage and relate to each other. For example, if I was Chuck Schumer and you stood up as Republicans to speak, I might immediately click off wanting to listen to you. Likewise, if I were Kevin McCarthy and you were Democrats standing up to listen to me, you might turn off listening and understanding me. Murthy also talked about how loneliness impacts people and their mental health development in communities. And the kinds of things that we're doing, even some of the kinds of structures we're advocating and building, are not the kinds of things we should be doing to build communities. Also, one of the things that we probably should clean up if we're going to go this kind of direction and limiting community inputs would be to purge a large number of sections from our community websites that talk about engagement, input, community involvement, and such, because those are starting to look quite hypocritical in my mind. And I would suggest we change some of those things. I have here hard copy, and before I give them to Jane to hand out, I had asked a week or two ago, including this to Glenn, to share them with you, but now I don't want to be the first one to cross some lines with the attorney who was present. Did these get forwarded and shared? Yes. Jane, hard copies here. On the back is a laundry list of the kinds of things that I've encountered with the variety of the types of things, partly with annexation development. We won't go down the street of those things, but, and by the way, Mr. Attorney, I could provide you between now and Tuesday's city council meeting a number of reasons why at least one city council person should probably be recused from any votes on some of the upcoming development situations. And I think a sufficient number of witnesses can support those comments. But we need to change the processes, people. The things we've got aren't working. I think the first meeting of yours that I attended, one of Glenn's staffers was retiring. He went through a checklist, and that checklist was very cold of, yep, did this, did that, did this. And I don't think any of us would want to have our heart surgeon look at us and say, yep, that's what they did.
Okay. Thank
Look
you,
at the
Mr. Smith.
processes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next on the list is Mark Danielson.
My name is Mark Danielson. I live at 251 Lincoln Street, and apologies in advance, I'm not an extemporaneous speaker, and my direction has just changed here. I just want to register the fact, you asked what kind of community do we want to live in? I want to live in a community in which we as people work together to shape our vision. And I feel like we've taken a big step back in that. I understand the legal concerns. We always run a balance between what's safe and what builds a community. And I'm afraid we've taken a wrong direction today. I appreciate what you people do and that you're willing to slog through some really rough stuff as volunteers, those of you. But I feel like we've given too much benefit of a doubt and too much weight to the legal argument over the practical argument of let's get in there and hash this through and understand what people who think differently from us think. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Danielson. Next on the list is Charlie Schilling.
Hello, I'm Charlie Schilling. I live at 224 Francis Street. So I understand and appreciate the legal situation that was brought to us tonight. It was brought to me at 3:30 this afternoon after spending months and hours preparing for tonight. So it's a little bit disappointing, and I feel very shut down. So our neighbors and I have been working very hard to be heard and to make sure we have a balanced view within the city. That's written right in your codes. It's written in all over the place. You're supposed to have a balanced view of the development versus citizen input, regardless of the development. I'll try not to use the words, because I do appreciate the legal point of that. balance involves risk versus reward. I've been in the corporate world my whole life, worked with attorneys, making products, there's risks, there's rewards. It requires balance. And when you just get things that just get shut down because we want to cover ourselves, there's no more risk versus reward. It just seems like that goes out the window. So I just want to let you know that we really are trying to give you a balanced view. You get developers that come in here with great presentations, they get all the time in the world with presentations, PowerPoints, they got a staff of artists and really nice stuff. And are we supposed to come in here with a paper napkin and speak for 5 minutes when they get untold amount of time? It doesn't seem like balance. So that's where we're coming from, with coming with professional presentations that provide a good, strong point versus, you know, the rant or the paper napkin type of presentation 5 minutes before the end of the big decision. So just want to let you know that we want to work with you. We've been working with the planning department. We're doing our best to do what we're asked to do and provide that input, but we want to get some balanced input and have our views heard at a balanced level. So thanks. We'll come back with a more, I guess, generic presentation. I guess maybe I should talk to somebody about how we can do this without being so specific and breaking any legal rules. But let's try to get some balance going there, and we need more than 5 minutes at the end of a long process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schilling. Mary Morphine? Okay, how did I do on the name? Morphew, okay. John Pillman. Thank you. And Doug Jones.
Chairman and members of the board, Doug Jones, 243 Sherman Street. I also will not mention the name of the project that I came to originally speak about, and I do appreciate where you guys are coming from and the binds that puts you in. In no way do we want to be the catalyst for screwing this up or making this thing trip up. That is not our intention, and I think you all know that. However, I do agree that you've taken a step backwards tonight by closing down the public. I appreciate the things that Mr. Goldberg and Mrs. Saunders have said, and I think they are, I think they're very appropriate. The challenge that I have and that I've had with this whole process and that I've learned through this whole process is that the developer and the staff have a chance to communicate and chat freely. The public has to literally, I'm not going to say beg, but you got to work really hard to get all this information, to understand all the information, to understand the process. And as you guys know, it changes almost daily. And all we have asked for all along here is for a seat at the table to make our neighborhood a great neighborhood and continue it to be a great neighborhood. And enabling us to do that is something that is drastically missing in here, in the whole process. So we have gone to staff and, you know, they've actually directed us to come here and say, hey, go tell planning and zoning what you guys are thinking. You know, you guys can put together a presentation, you can give your opinions, you know, make sure you guys get out in front of them. That's your avenue. I talked to Eugene May a month or so ago, and I said, how can we have more of a seat at the table? Talk to planning and zoning, talk to those guys. And now, now we're, you know, we're collared. And so I really would encourage you guys to think about, and us to also think about, how we can come together and make some kind of a system that is better than the one we have right now. So I have many ideas on how that can happen. We can have a series of webinars teaching people what the planning process is like. In fact, I think years ago there was something that said planner in residence or something, where it kind of came up to, you know, explain how the whole process works and get the community involved, because, you know, we need to deal with this problem of, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity, right? Of people moving in here and making the town great without putting in these ugly buildings that do not respect any of the patterns and the languages that are currently being ignored in Longmont, and taking the city and making it into ugly swaths of concrete in between buildings. We really need to see, a lot more green space and things happening and neighborhood involvement. And so if we can work together on a way, if you guys have ideas, please give us an avenue and show us what that avenue is, and help us to make this an easier path. So again, I appreciate what you guys do. You're all volunteers, I get that. You guys have a very difficult job, and we're just trying to work with you. We're just trying to make the city and our neighborhoods better. That's our goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. There is nobody else on the sheet, but if anybody else would like to step forward. Once again, you have 5 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is John Lochran. I live at 220 Sherman. And thanks for allowing me to express my opinion about this. I've been coming to a number of the meetings over the last several months as a result of the not discussed location that's in my neighborhood. But, coming to see your faces, I mean, Chairman Poland is how to say my name. I appreciate Commissioner Boone went down to the Francis Street lot to check it out before you voted on the annexation. I appreciate taking that time. And also I appreciate that Commissioner Sanders had said, like, she had volunteered and, worked her way into this position. So thank you all for I'm sure you all did, started somewhere. But I think as a citizen and a resident, like, we get drawn in here for something, like an issue draws us in, and we learn the process, and we become passionate as well, and think, I'm kind of interested in how this, I sat through a number of the meetings, I go to the council meetings, and sometimes at the council meetings, people are talking about, it's cherry pie day. We got to have substance. We can't have that. We need to come and we need to get drawn in. And I guess my kind of background is a communicator. But you can't just talk about, nothing. People won't come in. I feel bad for you folks that you have to, maybe if it's too much to hear a long presentation from people, but I feel bad that maybe you're in this vacuum talking to yourselves. And I think that you need the public in here as well. And we got to get them in, and the meat is the thing that's going to make it work. And that's what we got to do. And we can't neglect that. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lochran. Seeing nobody else step forward, I'll go ahead and close out the public invited to be heard. Next item is approval of the minutes from the April 19th, 2023 meeting. Sure.
Point of information, Jeremy, for the public invited to be heard for quasi-judicial proceedings, that's only for quasi-judicial boards, correct? So other advisory boards could hear comments on that?
I'm not, I
Well,
apologize.
if a citizen wants to come and talk about a case coming before planning and zoning, right? But it has to do with maybe environmental issues or parks or sustainability or any of the other advisory boards that are at the city of Longmont. Citizens could go and speak on it at those board meetings, those advisory meetings, to voice their concerns.
Yes,
If it was
they-
an issue pertinent to that advisory board, correct?
That's correct, Commissioner Saunders. I would still
I hope
recommend that
someone would have stayed, but.
yeah. I would still recommend the planning and zoning commissioners not consider any comments made during those advisory board public invited to be heard.
Sure.
But the public could still make a comment on.
Well, sure. I mean, we
whatever
still
they
have to,
want.
we have to ignore the newspapers and we have to, I mean, we're intelligent people. We know how to filter through it. I just wanted to make sure that I fully understood that it's strictly for quasi-judicial boards.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Poland.
The item on the list now is approval of the minutes for the April 19th, 2023 meeting. Do we have any motions, questions? Commissioner Goldberg.
Thanks, Chairman. I move to approve the April 19th minutes.
Thank you. Commissioner Saunders.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, let's move to a vote.
Commissioner Boone? Commissioner Goldberg? Chairman Poland?
Approve.
Commissioner Flake? Commissioner Lukacs?
Aye.
Commissioner Saunders?
Approve.
Chairman, that passes 6-0.
Thank you very much. Next item, public hearings, which we have no items today under public hearings. Next item is other business. Item 7A, land acknowledgement discussion. Carmen Palacio Ramirez, Community and Neighborhood Resource Director.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Carmen Ramirez, Director of Community and Neighborhood Resources. So I'm briefly going to go over some slides regarding the land acknowledgement that we have. I've been doing some orientation and trainings around land acknowledgement. As you can see, this one was May of last year, but it still holds. When we talk about the land acknowledgement, we talk about three things. It's meaningful, action, and impact. And you'll see here the land acknowledgement statement. And before I read that, I want to for you to take a look at that photo of all those young kids that are there. These are members of the Northern Arapaho that live in Wyoming on the Wind River Reservation, mixed in with Longmont kids. This was the first group of kids that came down. This summer we will have the third group of kids that will be coming down from Northern Arapaho, and it'll be the second time that our kids go up to Wind River. In addition to that, you should know that what is important around action, City of Longmont is the first, not only in the nation, but internationally, to become a sister city with a sovereign tribal nation. So nobody else has done this. And so when we talk about meaningful action, consider that. So the land acknowledgement statement is, we acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous people. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the first people have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. So that's the statement. We've done a lot of work, around educating around the injustices, but also healing and how to bring our communities and that next generation together. So I will tell you that the first group of kids, I had 10 people staying at my house because we had to cover boarding schools and the impact of boarding schools. And so we couldn't do the traditional of we're going to find host homes, right? We had to educate council. We had to educate sister cities around those injustices and then bring those kids together so that they could see that this is home. And it was very interesting to be on the Wind River Reservation and have some elders come up to me and say, you know, we live by Riverton, Wyoming, and never have they come to visit with us. And when we go there, we're fearful. Why is Longmont here? Right? And then you start to hear the stories of home. This was their home. And they tell you stories of how traditionally they cared for this land all the way up to Estes and the seasons and the gatherings. So those are stories that in many ways have been lost, and they want to make sure that the children, language, where their roots are, that is passed on. So that's part of that, again, action and impact. So just want to go over that. Land acknowledgement, it can be used to be read at the beginning of community meetings, gatherings, events, or meetings. It's meant to recognize Native nations who lived on these lands. It could also be read at meetings or small gatherings. It can be placed in emails and organizational materials, your agenda. Reading the land acknowledgement should be motivated by genuine respect and support for Native people. We don't want to tokenize this, and that's why I always, when I read the land acknowledgement, I go through and I tell the story of sister cities and the things that we're doing around that, so that people can understand that it's more than just a statement. Again, we're talking about the displacement of Native people who originally were here, and how it's been a home to others. It's interesting when I go to exhibits or we talk about planning, and what I hear is the Chicago colony, right? And we ask the question, who was here before them? There's always someone before them, right? In every community. Other communities have actually asked that question and started saying, well, wait a minute, who was here? There's a film that started this many years ago. It's called Two Rivers. And folks started asking the question, who was here before? And then started making relationships. And then the other piece to this that is important is that Native people are not just a point of history. They are here today, alive, professionals, involved in many things. So we want to make sure that it's not treated as just a token of something that happened in the past and is not present today. And that's why I love that picture of the youth, because it shows that we are present here today. So again, speaking and hearing these words of recognition is important. It's a way to create collaborative and accountability, and also respectful relationships with Indigenous communities. The other thing I wanted to share with you is our equity philosophy. So the City of Longmont actually has an equity team. We are focused on doing our work internally first. So as you can see, the equity team affirms equity is a fundamental value, seeks to build a community where outcomes are independent of one's identity. We recognize social, economic, and political forces that have historically and systemically shaped and limited access to opportunities and resources. And we commit to transforming systems to support equitable access to opportunities, resource, and power. We engage in a continual reevaluation and iterative transformation that is the foundation of an equitable community. So that's something that the city has started. We've been doing it for a number of years, but between a recession and COVID, we had a restart through the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. They have an equity foundation, and that kicked off us coming together internally and creating an equity team. So again, going back to meaningful action and impact, we start with asking the question of why. We're hoping to inspire others to take action. And then if you're delivering a land acknowledgement statement out of guilt, really kind of, again, why are we doing this? How are we doing this? Should it be authentic and not tokenizing? And that's pretty much it. I included several resources here if you want to take a look at it. Longmont Museum, we have the research that was done. And then I want to just share real quick, hang on. Council adopted this a while back. They actually adopted it in July of 21st, and the Museum and Sustainability Board also adopted it in 2021. So just wanted to share that with you. I don't know if you have any questions. I know I went through this pretty quick, but if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer questions.
Commissioner Saunders?
Thank you for this presentation. This is wonderful. We put this on all our emails at CU, but
Yes.
it's that second reason, I think, and it's not actionable. So my question to you, please, is how can I get these links that are in the slideshow so I can add them and start making it actionable on my
I can
emails?
send you all those links.
I would like that.
And I will tell you that I actually did a little bit of training, and there's some great small videos There's one by a Native person that talks about, so this is a question that comes up often. Who should read the land acknowledgement? It should not be a Native person, because who displaced Native communities, right? So it should be us as an institution, as an organization, right? And also to that, education around, traditionally, most Native people honor the land already. So in this training, I have a video where they talk about the traditional one, and then I have a young person who talks about don't tokenize us by asking us to read it or just making it a statement with no meaning or impact. But I'll send you those resources.
Thank you. I appreciate that and for coming and sharing that information with us beyond just the statement reading, because I firmly believe that that action item needs to come next. So thank you so much for that information.
Commissioner Lukash?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Carmen, for bringing this presentation to us and educating us about the land acknowledgement and the history that we are establishing now with the sister city, with the tribe down in, up in Wyoming. And I know I was the one that suggested to bring this presentation, and I think I want us to think of the why. And my why is because we are making decisions on the land. So I think it's natural to come to us. And yes, we do have bylaws. We do have a land development code. But we also have a brain and a heart. So we can take this statement and bring it to our hearts. And when we are making decisions, we can think of the indigenous peoples that are not here today. For example, we have so many empty chairs. Maybe we can think that some of those peoples could have been in those chairs today, and they are not because of us. So let's think of the why. This is my why. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about their why, but I fully support having a land acknowledgement, that maybe we could have it on our agenda and read it at every public meeting that we have. I know the Sustainability Board has it on their agenda, and they read it. And perhaps we all take turns in reading it, and it's not the same voice. Sometimes, one teacher back in the day, they told us that when you're reading something, you're retaining 30% of what you're reading. So I think by individual reading, we get to connect more with the language and with the text. So that's my suggestion. And I did have some questions for you as well. Could you tell us more about how City of Longmont became a sister city with the tribe? Again, I want to think it's not just to tokenize, like, hey, we want to be the first to do this. But how did it came to be this connection?
Well, and I'll also share this link. There is a documentary called Little by Little. And it's one that we made ourselves, the Longmont Public Media and staff, with tribal members, that tells the story. But I will say that sometimes you find the most unlikely allies when you have a conversation. So it started with a conversation with the former mayor, Mayor Bagley, and asked this question. And I sent him, I knew that there was going to be a convening of 13 federally recognized tribes at the city of Boulder. I knew they were coming. I suggested he go and talk to folks and said, I can't go. I'm not going to be in town, so try and behave. And he went and asked some questions to Stephen Pastorce. And unfortunately, Stephen Pastorce, who was a business council member for the Northern Arapaho, passed away a couple of months ago. Their lifespan the average lifespan is 47 years on a reservation. So he passed away very young. But he struck up a friendship, and they started having conversations. And then we started talking about sister cities. And then we took council and staff up there. And so it was really about initiating a relationship. They came down, we went up there, we learned about not just life on the reservation, but made those personal connections. As you saw, we're talking about a youth exchange. We are now talking with the Senior Center about an elder exchange, bringing elders from Northern Arapahoe down to Longmont. So it started really with creating that relationship and then looking how we could formalize it. There is, like I said, the little by little. There's also a signing video that I can send the links. When you hear folks talk about, I grew up hearing stories about our homelands. I am now, I remember Lee's age, early 40s, Lee Spoonhunter, who it was chairman at the time. And he said, I've never visited Longmont or I've never visited Estes Park, but I've heard the stories of where we lived, where we hunted, where we gathered, over generations. So every year we strengthen that relationship. Every year we convene our youth together because that is the hope, right? That next generation will continue those relationships. And this year we're hoping that possibly we will have youth from Ciudad Guzman in Mexico, as well as Northern Arapahoe and Longmont youth. So.
Thank you. So I do have a question for Glenn.
I'm ready.
Yeah. Your team, planning and development team, your whole department, do you take in consideration any, of course, the land acknowledgement, but how do you apply the land acknowledgement in your work, your team's work? Have you thought of that, or are you already doing some things? And maybe this could go broader to equity, right? But also specifically to Indigenous people.
I have thought about that, and I think what's our tool? We use the Land Development Code. We have a Historic Preservation Commission. But Carmen has a point. We talk about the Chicago Colony and putting our original town site in place and how do we preserve aspects of it. But to be honest, I don't know that we go beyond that. We don't have an archaeological element to the Land Development Code. In fact, I don't even think we have one in Envision Longmont, for that matter. I have seen, for instance, I've spent time in the Telluride area, working there. Somebody sent me one of their plans that they just adopted. They had their land acknowledgement stated on the document. So, I don't know if I answered your question or not, but.
Well, maybe this will give you more thought for the future. And myself thinking of it as well, because I'm asking the question, but I also want to, I'm thinking of an answer as well, right? I know like in our land code, for example, we have a chapter on naming, right? Naming streets, naming lands. Perhaps we could revitalize that language to be more specific on Indigenous people and some of the injustices that Longmont has contributed to, or Longmont people. And to be more specific, I'm thinking out some names of people that we've heard in our city all the time, but they actually contributed to the Sand Creek Massacre. So how can we be reactive at this point and make updates, thinking, correcting our mistakes and recognizing the injustices that some of these names did.
Well, I will say, we have actually, and Carmen has led it, brought forward a street naming policy for specific situations. In fact, most recently, so I'll let her speak to that.
So actually, historically, quite a few years ago, there used to be a street named Shivington. And we all know he had a major role in the Sand Creek Massacre. That street was renamed. It's now Sunrise. I hope I got it right. And we went through a whole process of working with folks. There is a Mount Evans Drive and Mount Evans Street. Consists of about 150 homes. What the decision that was made was, given staff's limitation and capacity right now, to convene 150 homes to outreach, educate, and then come to some sort of consensus in addition to reimbursement. If you think about everything that is tied to your physical address, driver's license, bank accounts, credit cards, right? Amazon, all those things, and the process that you have to go when you change your address. So that was something that at this point was not going to happen. In addition, it was at the moment also when the state was reconsidering changing the name of Mount Evans to Blue Sky, and that has happened. Interesting enough, it seems easier to change the name of a mountain than 150 homes, but it does not mean that we shouldn't do it. It also doesn't mean, and we had talked about this, any new streets and any new developments. What's the criteria, the equity criteria around that says this is what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, right? How can we look at that criteria and share that criteria so that developers coming in understand, because I think they're the ones that get to name the streets, is that right? Okay, I'm not a planner, so we want to make sure that they adhere to that respect and how we can do that.
Right, yeah, and then there's the planner who reviews the application, so they could make suggestions, yeah. Any thoughts on the name Dickens?
Well, I think that one of the things that is interesting is how do we go back and look at history and look at all aspects of history and then understand what is the movement of change, right? So for instance, Sandstone Ranch, there is one version of Sand Creek Massacre that is not a Native American version. So I'm working with staff on that, on how do we change it? How do we balance that? You know, if there's one version here, how do we provide the other version, right? That maybe provides some insight and truth that the first version did not have. So I think one of the things that the city has done is that these are usually community generated. So we had a group when the name of Shevington was changed. We had a community group that came forward, and they're the ones that really said we need to push for this. There is a level of community engagement, education, and consensus really to support these kinds of things. I can say that it's the right thing to do, but if 99% are not in support of that, then even the right thing to do isn't going to happen.
Right. And I asked that because I was just at the museum recently where they have a great exhibit on, it exhibits artwork from indigenous artists, but also it has a permanent section that talks about the history of our region. And there is in one frame there, it has a list of residents from back then that participated in the Sand Creek Massacre. So these are public names out there, and that was one of them listed.
And I'll just add that one of the things that we're working on is that permanent exhibit will be updated, and our hope is that now that we have an established relationship with the Northern Arapaho, that they will provide us guidance on making sure that that history is truthful. We are also working at some point with the tribal history to come through and look at our open space. The hope is that we would go from Sandstone probably out to McIntosh and further out to kind of walk that route with them, and they can begin to tell us where we might put interpretive signage and where we might be able to do things that would be more appropriate. There are a lot of activities. Last year we had a Native American festival and film festival and brought in a lot of folks. The Duality exhibit that you're talking about is contemporary Native American artists. They've come in and they've done talks. regarding missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, those kinds of things that we're hoping that, again, continually to provide that education to our community.
Yeah, and I learned a lot, you know, as many know, I wasn't born here, but I learned a lot in the last few years for sure, and I definitely appreciate your educational moment here. I'll leave my colleagues to ask more questions or say their thoughts.
Does anybody else have any questions? I guess, Carmen?
Yes.
Yeah, outside of the land acknowledgement statement and where it would be appropriate for our commission, where it might be put, do you have any other ideas? Are there suggestions? I guess one of the things I'm looking at is, and it's something that Mayor Bagley said after it was passed, is we passed this, but now what? The land acknowledgement statement, right, but now what? I guess that's the question. And then there's a second part to Glenn, is what would the steps be if somebody has a suggestion from the commission to somehow incorporate this? Is it something that they would bring up to you and it would be under other business that we would talk about in a future meeting?
Well, potentially it could be a change to your bylaws, and we know what that process looks like. So, right, if there's a majority of you that would like to have a future discussion with possible action item, then we would make sure it happens on an agenda.
Okay. Commissioner Saunders.
This is my favorite topic, bylaws. I'm so glad you brought this up, Glenn. So I love moments like this, the education moments, and then what Tony's going to bring to the table, the presentation for Sugar Mill. But in our previous conversation about the bylaws, right, we're quasi-judicial, and we're doing the specific lawyer things that we want to be very cognizant of. But, you know, if you go to our favorite bylaws and you see Part B, proceeding of meetings to be conducted in a work session format, is different than regular business format. And I would like to move that one work session meeting be added to the Planning and Zoning Commission monthly calendar for regular and alternate members to discuss city matters in an informal manner where we're not moving, we're not making motions, we're going through the call to order, roll call communications, continued business, other new business, items from the commission, items from council representative, planning director, and then tapes and adjournment. So these would be informal meetings that we could do monthly to discuss items like this. And, you know, wordsmith things like this, and how could we do action items? And part of the primary functions, to remind everyone, prepare and recommend to the council a comprehensive plan, review and make recommendations on legislative actions to council, and decisions on specific land use applications. So anything outside of the quasi-judicial procedures, I think would be appropriate for us to have these work sessions once a month. And I've put that motion to the floor for some discussion.
Actually, you put a motion to the floor, so we need to see if there's a second for it. No problem. Do we have a second for the motion? If not, we can go back to further discussion because the motion doesn't move forward because there's no second, but we can continue discussion on it. Commissioner Flake.
Is it possible that we could agree to have our favorite attorney look into possible wordings that would incorporate this language in a usable and logical way into how we do business? So that we could consider it at subsequent meetings of our commission.
Sorry, Commissioner Flagg, is the question about including the land acknowledgement statement in future meetings or just having a work session included with our?
No, I
regulations?
would like to see us make it sort of an action item at a commission meeting just like we did for the wording for limiting of discussion before, when we do the public needing to be heard, because this is, I think, why Carmen is bringing this, is to have us actually talk about it. We could talk about it here right now, and, but I think we have to have language to pass as part of our bylaws.
So you're talking about language for the bylaws.
Correct.
Certainly, I think at this point, certainly the commission's free to continue discussing the merits of having a land acknowledgement statement, but we can also work with the planning director on getting an agenda item with a proposed bylaw change to include a land acknowledgement reading at the beginning of every session, possibly for the next or possible consideration the next planning and zoning meeting to adopt.
Yes, I think.
What-
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, that's what my concept would be.
Okay. Is there anybody, I guess, Commissioner Saunders, just to let you, my feelings on, and why I didn't second the motion is, I think we do have the ability with other business to discuss things. If the calendar gets too busy for one meeting, we can always have a second meeting in the month. So if there are particular items that you would like to discuss, items like this, what I think is the proper way to handle it is that you can reach out to Glenn and say, hey, Glenn, I'd like to discuss this at the next meeting. And then Glenn can look at putting it on the agenda. I don't think we need to schedule a second meeting every month to handle that. I think we have that built into our agenda under other business, that we can discuss those items. It just has to be brought forward to the planning director.
And Mr. Chairman, I might just add, I want to make sure the commission's on board too, to bring it forward to a future agenda.
Yes, thank you, and I'm aware of that pathway to bring agenda items to the commission. Chair Poland, thank you. I just think that some items are better hashed out, if you will, without the whole formal procedure of the parliamentary procedure that is for a regular meeting, that wouldn't be included in a work session meeting. And so maybe Jeremy and Glenn could speak to that, of what a work session might, how it might look different than a regular meeting for some of these more presentation type workshop issues.
Sure, well, there's no action items, and we do have actually, as I think you read, there's a whole different agenda for a work session. We don't normally have public invited to be heard, but I think that is up to the discretion of the chair. So I actually have an item where I'm gonna talk through your number of meetings this summer, because it is a busy summer, but if you want us to hold a work session, we can certainly do that.
And just so my fellow commissioners know, I'm not married to the one meeting a month, like maybe bi-month, like, you know, like every other month, or maybe the beginning of the summer, the busy time of the season, maybe after the annual meeting. I just think that there are some items that are not, that would be better addressed as a group with this sort of more fluid type business model or meeting model, as it were, for some of these other items, being that we're so busy with some of the process items from planning development.
I would say, I guess my feelings is, if you think that there is, and I guess the proper place to do that would probably items from the commission where you could bring it up. If there's a particular, I would rather do it on a as-needed basis rather than schedule a meeting even if it's every other, I just don't feel comfortable having those meetings scheduled if there's not an agenda for it. But if there's items we need to do, I would bring it up under the commission, items from the commission, and then you can bring it up. And then we can talk with Glenn and we can work on a date for those.
oh, sorry. I'm fine to table it if there are no other comments on it, and we can maybe bring it up later and see how you guys feel about, after maybe Tony's presentation, and see if any other thoughts bubble up on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I guess our takeaway, Carmen, is for us to, we're gonna work on looking at the land acknowledgement statement and how it can be incorporated into the bylaws, and I would encourage the other members of the commission, if anything comes in your mind regarding this, to think about it. You said to be thoughtful, so the one thing for us to do is not to be rash with our thoughts and just rushing in, but if you think that there is something that is valuable that outside of the bylaws that we could do, I would encourage you then to bring it up at the items from the commission at a meeting, and or put it forward to Planning Director Glenn Vandenmuigen.
I might add, we can send out Carmen's presentation, so you have all those links as well.
Perfect.
To each member.
Commissioner Lukash.
That's what I was going to ask for. I think we need time to go through all those resources that you shared with us and be thoughtful in our decision.
And I just shared also with Glenn, we're part of GARE, which is Government Advancing Racial Equity. It's an organization across the U.S. Many municipal governments are there. There's a lot of educational opportunities within that. And then, as you discussed, you know, even something as simple, maybe not simple, the criteria around street naming and having some thoughtfulness around that. Those are important steps also. So thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to come and talk to you all. So thank you.
Sorry, I just had one more question about the land acknowledgement. We do have to have it then written into the bylaws to have it be read into each meeting, correct or incorrect?
I think if you make it part of your agenda, we would need to amend the bylaws, which.
That's
But
technical
as
term.
Chairman Poland said, you could always read it as a part of a presentation from commission too. So we'll show you what both options could look like.
So a question on the process here. Would we be first voting on adopting the land acknowledgement and then ask the staff to bring the bylaws, or do we ask for the bylaws and then that will mean adoption?
Yeah, as Carmen was pointing out, the council has adopted the land acknowledgement. So I think it's really about how you actionalize it, I guess. Whether it's reading every meeting, whether it's providing a part of your documents, whether it's on specific cases, I don't know. That's kind of up to your discretion.
So we don't have to necessarily have a vote on adopting it, we just need a consensus on how we interpret it or how we apply it?
Right, unless you want to change it, then I'd say you go back and ask permission, but.
If I could, I think you identified several ways. Glenn talked about envision and how that's not in there. I recently worked with the folks that were doing Button Rock and updating their plan. And they said, we don't have anything here before it became Button Rock, right? And how do we incorporate that history and that acknowledgement? So it seems like there's different places, street criteria, envision, or other comprehensive plans that may have an opportunity to not just reference, but then consider how that might be actionable today.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna clarify. So I can either read the land acknowledgement during my items from commission, correct? Or we could all do it at each of our turns. Or I can give my plus 5 days notice, look at Jeremy smiling, about adding it, wanting to add it to the amendment for next meeting. I'm correct on both of those? For the agenda, in the agenda of our order of meeting. Yep, Jeremy's going, yep. Okay, just wanted to clarify, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carmen.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good night.
Okay, the next item is item 7C, which is a sugar factory, but do we want to take a 5-minute break? Yes, okay, we will take a 5-minute break and reconvene in 5 minutes.
Taking that out of your time.
Good evening, Commissioners. Name is Tony Chacon. I'm the redevelopment manager for the city of Longmont. I'm guessing you did read through all 250 pages of the plan and the appendices, so even though I have a presentation, you most probably don't need it. Is that correct? Everybody's looking at blank stares. Okay, admit, how many did not read the whole thing? Come on, come on. Anyway, so I'm here tonight to talk about our planning efforts for the areas known as the sugar factory, which also means it's also referred to as the sugar mill, and I guess it's a question of what's historically accurate. But just for your information, Sugar Mill Road has been there for almost 100 years, and it's always been called Sugar Mill Road. But the other area is the STEAM area, which was an effort by the city council to try and figure out some visioning for that area, the lower downtown area between the creek and the downtown itself. So we did bring in a group, Stantec as a consultant that worked with us, property owners, some of the prospects, businesses, some community input, to kind of come up with what we're calling a sub-area plan. Now, tonight, we're not asking the commission to take any action on this plan. This is just for information purposes only, and any input, questions, comments you may have at this time. So with that, I'm just going to go through this quickly as to what the general elements of the plan are. So actually, the plan covers two distinct areas, but we call it two distinct areas in one plan. And you may ask, why did we cover these two areas simultaneous? Well, the primary reason being is interconnectivity from a transportation network, because the sugar factory area is effectively an island within the city that has very limited access in all directions. And so it's very critical that we figure out how we work that connectivity back to the west, and that therefore brings us through what's known as the STEAM area. So up here, you have the image that shows the two general areas as they are distinct. The sugar factory, or I should say Martin Street, is kind of the defining boundary between the two sub-areas. And then the study area goes out to where 3rd interconnects with State Highway 119, also Ken Pratt Boulevard. And then on the west side, it's Main Street at this time. So some of the challenges to redevelopment in this area were highlighted in the plan, and I just want to go through them really quickly. But the sugar factory has some major challenges to it, and those, first of all, most of that area is not in the city limits presently, has to be annexed into the city. Serious environmental conditions. All those old historic buildings have abundance of asbestos product in them. We have estimates in the range of $30 to $50 million to remediate that property, so very expensive. The rail tracks and sewer treatment plant, you can imagine what that does from a land use perspective and a connectivity perspective. The historic building reuse, so even though those buildings may look awesome, to do something with them is what kind of enterprise or use can you put in them just by virtue of their construction, in the interior construction. And then also, some of those buildings are actually deteriorating, and if you've ever driven by, some have actually crumbled to the ground already, which we most likely will not be looking to rebuild those particular buildings. The other challenges, the city's current development standards, primarily related to heights and roadway widths are some of the obstacles. Access and infrastructure, again, access is an issue from a roadway standpoint, and infrastructure in that there is effectively no infrastructure out there to support any level of development at this time. And then we do have some mining and potential wetland issues as part of the project area. On the STEAM area, one of the big issue is connectivity to the downtown. Thank you to BNSF Railroad, effectively. That's the big challenge. And right now, we don't have that connectivity north-south between Main Street and Martin Street. And so that's one challenge that we're going to try to overcome. It does have some environmental concerns.
Again, development standards play a role. Land assemblage, because most of that property down there are rather small parcels and not big enough for a development upon themselves. So a lot of times it will require assemblage. Circulation and infrastructure. There is some infrastructure down there. There's some sanitary sewer lines. There's 2 main trunk lines that help serve that area. But then they're either in the wrong locations for redevelopment, or they're possibly undersized for any redevelopment activity. There's a lack of identity related to the STEAM area, and I'll tell you, excessive land costs. We are in the process right now of acquiring land in that area, and believe it or not, we're paying anywhere from $30 to $50 a square foot for land, which is exorbitant in any market in Colorado. So some of the opportunities in the sugar factory area, of course, the historic buildings, restoration and reuse of those buildings. Open space asset, the city owns everything from Ken Pratt all the way north to the railroad tracks, and that is actually open space, so it's immediately adjacent to the development area. We have larger development parcels, so effectively there are 4 large parcels that can be sold for development. It makes it easier for developers wanting to develop at that location. Provides the opportunity for a visual gateway and activity center for those that drive in from the east. The first thing you usually see coming into Longmont is the smokestack and then the buildings, so it's important to keep those vestiges. Roadway and trail enhancements, and then the other thing from an opportunity standpoint is getting some infrastructure funding and funding for some of the remediation through tax increment that would come from the urban renewal district. So it qualifies as an urban renewal district. On the STEAM area, downtown connectivity is an opportunity. City-owned land, the city actually owns some parcels down there that could offer some development opportunity. It could serve as a gateway. Enhanced circulation and connectivity. Again, there's limited roadways internally. And then also, its opportunity is transit and multimodal facility access, because the first and main transit station is effectively immediately across the street on Main Street at First Avenue. That's where we will be building that facility. So the plan covers collective matters as well as opportunities and challenges to reach each of the sub areas. So I want to kind of go over some of the collective plan priorities in the plan. Housing, what we're trying to do is encourage housing options, a diverse range of housing that at varying price points. And so we're not looking to build necessarily a lot of affordable housing, but we're trying to make housing affordable for various diverse interests. So it's a range of housing affordability. Transportation, we're trying to improve the regional and local transportation connections, because again, it basically dissects the city's transportation network. Development, encourage connectivity for parcels and to the broader community. So in other words, we don't want to create an island out there of development that has no relationship whatsoever to the rest of the city. We want it to be known as part of the city, be part of the city, but have its unique identity also. Community, looking at various types of improvements like cultural facilities, art facilities, public spaces and such that people can utilize, and not only persons within the development itself, but persons from around the community. And then sustainability. We will be looking at several elements of sustainability, or it promotes efforts of sustainability, particularly related to energy and natural resources. And on the energy, for example, one thought we will be pursuing is taking advantage of the sewer treatment plant being in the area and the associated heat that's generated from the pipes to utilize that towards heating and cooling of facilities. So the plan also talks about some possible regulatory modifications that should be given consideration. an increase in the allowable building heights. So right now, as you may be aware, an applicable development or zone district for this area effectively limits heights to 4 stories. It can go to 5, it's a mixed-use project, and then there's some additional levels you can build if you incorporate affordable housing, and what's the other element? And transit into it. So, and the sugar factory area, for example, the transit element possibly goes away because it's not close enough to a transit facility. Affordable housing, integrating that into actual market rate buildings is a challenge. So what happens is they're starting to come down on the heights, and yet there are opportunities, the development community has indicated opportunities to have some things of higher heights. The other complicating factor in that regard is the sugar mill, the primary building itself, most probably already exceeds what the minimum requirement is for the city. Or I should say maximum for the city. Elimination of unnecessary utility easements. And so we have a situation right now where there's a street right-of-way, and then we have these utilities that are now asking for additional easements outside the right-of-way, which effectively broadens the depth of the street width, and where we're trying to actually bring buildings closer together. So that's another issue that we'd be looking into. Allowing for a narrower and alternative street design, reduce or eliminate minimum parking requirements. That is a big issue. What we're trying to do is increase density, and when surface parking comes into play, densities go down. And on the other hand, structures drive the cost up on projects. So what we're recommending, or this plan recommends, is that we look at for alternative strategies on parking and how to get capacity down and actual utilization down. Utilization of regional storm detention and water quality. So right now, when a development comes in, they usually have to meet both those criteria on site. And so the plan is saying, let's take advantage of some of the open spaces we have to see if we can create a better situation for water quality that's more of a regional capacity. Public parks, public space consolidation. Again, the code requires a development to have so much space for public purposes, which doesn't necessarily make sense if you've got a 20 square foot pad, but consolidating that into something that may give you about a half acre of land for a public facility, that's what this plan is pursuing. And then there's the potential for creation of a regulatory overlay district that would have more specific design considerations and criteria for the development as it were to proceed. Infrastructure and funding is another collective area. So pursuit of public-private partnerships will definitely be necessary to support development in these areas. Establishment of a possible establishment of taxing districts. So you all may have heard of like metro districts and general improvement districts. And so there would be an evaluation of whether those could help build some of the infrastructure. And we do know that the metro districts is rather restrictive, or the ordinance here in the city is extremely restrictive, but there are other district mechanisms that could be given consideration. Again, the urban renewal could be applied to this district or to these improvements. And then a collaboration with the Downtown Development Authority, which a portion of the STEAM area falls within their boundaries. And they, like the Urban Renewal District, have access to tax increment funds to help it with improvements. And then the pursuit of environmental grants and loans. So these are usually very minimal, but every penny helps when it comes to remediating $30 to $50 million worth of contamination. So just quickly, some of the elements in the sugar factory part of the plan. Historic structure restoration, higher density mixed use is foreseen, a diverse range of housing, providing affordability and adaptability. And the reason I mention adaptability, there's talk about how do you build houses for the long-term life cycle of a household, so they don't necessarily have to move in the future. I just said that. Employment opportunities are another component, a variety of public spaces, urban agricultural elements. And you would say, well, what does that mean? Well, it does not mean we're going to be out there growing and harvesting. What it means, there are elements that would respect the agricultural element. It could be community gardens. It could be educational components. Actually, the restoration of those historic buildings themselves, because they still are vestiges of the agricultural uses in the area. Human scale and walkability, again, sustainable elements, and innovative stormwater management. And what that's about is, again, looking to see if we can create a wetland area that really benefits the river at that location there. And then on the mobility side for the sugar factory, really focusing on pedestrians and bicycle safety, multimodal circulation and connectivity, parking reductions and capacity reductions, enhanced connectivity to major streets, downtown, and the transit center. I think that was mentioned. We need to figure out how to tie all that together. Enhanced public transit and micro-mobility measures. There is the possibility or the belief that we should be looking to extend our transit services from First and Main into the Sugar Mill area somehow, whether that's bus or train, we just don't know, but some element of public transport. And then also the mobility is figuring out how do we get across those rail tracks. And that's the big challenge because they're pretty much on every border of the sugar mill, or sugar factory, sorry. And then under STEAM, again, we're looking at high density. And I would say it's really focused on high density. The sugar factory area would allow for maybe a range of some lower density product. But the idea in STEAM is we're talking effectively tall buildings for the most part. Commercial along primary streets, especially in a mixed-use product. Flexible and adaptable multi-use buildings. So if you build a parking garage, for example, can that lower floor be modified to accommodate some other use in the future, subject to cars, going away someday, possibly? Development of the city-owned properties again. Disperse smaller public spaces, enhancement of stream corridors through the STEAM area. In addition to the St. Vrain, there is actually I guess it's a slow channel that runs north-south paralleling Martin Street. And so the idea would be those type of elements is that we bring them back to a natural standard to the best extent possible. Institute gateway features, extension of Main Street improvements. So again, the idea tying that lower area to our historic Main Street area. And then again, sustainable elements would be built into any of the development. And then on the mobility side is promoting walking and bicycling more than anything. So people should not have to be able to or should not want to drive to downtown if they live in the STEAM area. And so we want to make sure that that gives them the facilities they would need. North-south street connections need improvement. The trail access to the St. Vrain Greenway. So again, it's rather hard to get to there unless you stay to the main streets of Martin Street and Main Street. And as you almost likely know, Main Street is not necessarily the best bicycle facility to ride at this time. Another thing is called Rethinking Third Avenue. And so it's effectively looking how do we extend the downtown to the east in addition to the north-south orientation, because there's a lot of opportunity along that corridor. It's public transit supportive. In other words, get the densities there that would drive the ridership at the transit center. Micro-mobility options and utilization. Wayfinding. It's really hard to find places in that particular part of town. And not only there, but even to the downtown area. There's a lot of features that people just don't know where things are at. And we would look to discourage surface parking in that particular area. So either it's that parking reduction, you don't provide parking, or you figure out how to build a structure or participate in a public or shared parking garage, which is the last item there. And we thought we'd just, for your consumption, give you a vision of one of our prospective developers that's working on this project right now. Ignore some of the kind of Italian edifices on top of the buildings. This was done by an international designer. It's Leon Pryor and Estudio Urbano. They're out of Guatemala. But what it does show is a rather unique vision for what this area could be, given what this plan is pursuing. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn. He's going to talk about the few next steps.
Yeah, staff kind of struggled with what do we have here, a sub-area plan? Is it really amending Envision Longmont when we have this great section that gives us direction to make change in specifically the sugar mill, sugar factory area? But we did know we had to drill down a lot deeper because there's so many barriers. So I think initially we put in that this is really an implementation plan and we'd love your input, and we're going to bring it to council for final approval. But as we thought it through and I looked at the corridor study that we did for North Main, we got great input from the Planning Commission on that plan, and you're really part of it. So we'd love to hear your comments. To be honest, staff is still looking at some of the recommendations, so it's a little bit of a work in progress still, but we'll make those final changes and we'll bring it back to you for a formal recommendation to the city council. And then ultimately it'll go to city council for their acceptance. So that's kind of where we are. It has taken quite a bit longer than we thought it would. Part of that was a staffing issue. I'll blame staffs that moved on to greener pastures, but also when we started this process, there wasn't anybody interested in this property. And since then, and I'd like to think part of it was the process and getting excitement out there. We have a number of developers, particularly looking at the sugar factory area. So they've brought in a whole lot more of their own input into the process, and Tony showed you an architectural kind of idea of the sugar factory area. So that's where we are. It took much longer to get here, but I think we have a plan that's probably 85% complete, and we will bring it back to you. And we'd love to hear your comments, suggestions, changes, issues at this point.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say on the developers, we actually have 3 builders or developers that are looking at a collective 120 to 130 acres of land to develop at this time. So they're working in partnership with you. They're trying to collaborate on how you fit the pieces together. But it's a great opportunity, and that's what we're trying to work through. And hopefully this plan will give us some general guidance to them on how to proceed with the preparation of that plan. So with that, like Glenn said, we're open for questions, comments, whatever you might have. And just let you know, too, if you have comments after the meeting in the next week or so, you're more than welcome to share those with us, too.
So Glenn, outside of today then, how would you like us to feed comments if we come out over the next week?
Sure, send them to Tony or me.
Okay.
And I'll send them to Tony.
Very good.
They always get back to me.
I guess the one question I have is, I remember when we were getting public feedback, and you guys were going out to all the functions and doing all the questionnaires and stuff. I know that one of the things that people were asking for is an arts area. Is that going to be somehow incorporated maybe in the STEAM part?
Well, the plan would basically say both areas have that opportunity to build some kind of facility. The STEAM area in the plan actually notes that it's most probably a better location for civic-type facilities. So if for some reason the city wanted to, you know, have an annex to its city hall or something like that, that would be a good area to put it. But it does also have an element allowing for cultural type facilities, whereas the sugar factory area does expressly promote cultural activities, festivals, and so forth like that. So when you're talking about an actual physical facility of some form, I think both areas would be applicable. It's just going to be more about what makes most sense from the functioning of that facility.
Would you have something similar to what they did over at the redevelopment of the mall area, where part of that area is, they've designed it so that if they needed to do a bigger function, they can easily block off certain streets to
Yeah.
create a bigger area for.
Yeah, and that's a good question. So that was the one point there about, you know, street design and looking at designs that maybe don't meet our current standards. So that could be a street, for example, which are not currently in our standards, that is more of a Woonerf, just a wide street, no curbs, and allows for that cutting off at certain points to allow for those festival activities and such. So, yeah, that's actually somewhat discussed in the plan. And just let you know, they're also in the back of the plan, if you didn't see, there are actually street sections that we're proposing for various levels of types of streets. And actually, one of those is a street section that what they call a complete street, I think, or something like that.
Right.
That is the intent of that particular street section.
Commissioner Flake.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Early on, we were taking surveys, and I took several of them, and one of the options offered up was an actual, one of those growing buildings where
Yeah.
they're actually raising plants inside.
Yeah.
And so they're doing vertical kind
Yeah.
of planting.
Yeah, and that's actually in the sugar factory. You'll see an intensity map in there. It's not a land use map, it's intensity, because we intend the entire area would be mixed use land use. But that western portion provides a opportunity for that type of development or buildings. It doesn't mean they have to incorporate those into their plan, but it gives them that option. And it could drive some of that decision-making, talking about utilization of the heat source from the sewer. That's right in proximity, and so there is a good possibility we could see some of those type of establishments come forth.
Would we actively try to recruit?
We're working with the developer to try and encourage them to pursue those opportunities, and then when we see opportunities out there, we're out there discussing it with prospects, yes.
And in combination with that, it was also suggested by one of the surveys that we would also have sort of an eating court where you'd have different restaurants and different chefs, and maybe one of these kitchens where people can try out what they might do as a business and come in and create
Yeah.
menus.
So that's kind of that agricultural business piece of it. So for example, could they take they're actually looking at the possibility of taking some of the warehouse buildings and creating those type markets in there, an indoor market, and then also the possibility of food prep and canning is another possibility, just by virtue of the size of some of those warehouse buildings.
So in those warehouse buildings, would you also have something like a Mercado?
It's possible, yeah. Again, I think that's one of the elements they're looking at doing, is getting uses like that will activate the area, bring people to the area.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Thank you, Chairman. Hey, Tony.
Hey.
First, can you just set me straight here? When I think about the phrase sugar mill, I think about the two silos over by the Pratt Street overpass, just on the west side of Maine.
Yeah, those were flour silos.
Flour? Is that called the flour mill or
that was the flour mill.
Thank you. Thank you. Sugar mill, sugar factory. Okay, cool. Thank you. On a more serious note and relevant note, would you mind going to your map? It was one of your first slides.
Okay, let's see if I can get back. I think it was my second slide, right?
That's
That one?
perfect, yeah.
Okay.
I wonder if either you or Glenn with a mouse can kind of just highlight what have we approved there? What's already happening in at least on the sugar factory side? I know we've recently approved some residential building, maybe there
Right
was
here.
some,
So right here,
yeah, some
Planning
commercial.
Commission approved a preliminary plat
Yep,
for some apartments.
Yes.
That's, the Fairfield Development is
Right.
doing that. That's the only active application relative to this plan at this time. There are a couple of other developments on the periphery. There's one, you can kind of see that semicircle up here,
yep,
right there. Or no, here it is. This one here.
yes.
So that's submitted, and I believe that's in process for annexation. That will be forthcoming to the Planning Commission here soon. And then there's another development. Oh, that, and then, Dinnerstein was a plat here in the Steam area right here.
Okay.
And I believe that was approved, preliminary plat approved, right?
No, it wasn't preliminary.
Oh, that's right, because it's already platted.
Right, so that's an administrative project.
Yeah.
That's in the process.
And then there's another project that's about to get underway in the near future, and that's by a group called Rockefeller. And yes, we do believe it's Rockefeller's money, but not necessarily him. And I lost my.
Are you pointing somewhere?
I know, I'm trying to find it. There it is. I couldn't find it. And that's up here in this little piece right here. And that's an apartment project too. So there's a lot of activity in the immediate area, but relative to the central area here, which are the larger land holdings,
yeah.
there's nothing that has come forth yet. They are still in the preliminary conceptualization process and preliminary civil engineering process to figure out how they make all the utilities work there.
Cool. Man, why do I have a vague recollection of us approving some sort of gravel mining north of 119 in that area?
You did, but that was a few years back.
Agreed.
Yeah, so
Did it never-
that's that lower portion, I was mentioned mining, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, apologies if you said it. 'Cause
Yeah,
I-
well, right down here along the sliver, there's right there, they got permission for mining.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
so you said that.
and so they're right now working with Aggregate Industries that has the
Yes.
rights to mine
Yes.
to see if they can either accelerate that or somehow just relinquish their rights to that. So that puts that particular property owner, which are the Goldens, are in that process right now.
I think that came in at the same time, just south of 119 over by Costco. I think there was some
That-
mining that might
That
look
was the
like
more
it was just
recent
starting.
one where, yeah, so Costco was actually part of that mining where the city had to compensate
Yeah,
for
okay.
the loss of mining revenue.
Okay, cool. I'm going to defer to the rest of my peers for any more kind of visionary ideas on direction for you. My last question is really around your number one bullet was on affordable or attainable or workforce housing. Is there a world where we can, in this district, perhaps require applicants to build those affordable units rather than take the opportunity to pay in lieu? This has come up recently where I think that one apartment complex on the east side, there was discussion about whether they should be building or contributing to the Affordable Housing Fund. Is there a world where in this area we can say, you know what, we have identified this as a great opportunity or a great place for affordable, attainable workforce housing. So, sorry, Saka, you actually got to build, not have the opportunity to pay in lieu.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work, but I'm assuming that would have to be a city council decision as part of their ordinance. Is that right?
Sure, I mean, right now they have the option
Yep.
to do the fee in lieu for affordable housing.
Right.
But as you know, council is making a big push towards attainable housing, which is for purchase. So we actually see the sugar factory as a great opportunity for that.
Cool.
And just let you know, what it comes down to is going to be the financial viability to do
100%.
that. Because you've got already 30 to 50 million that you're not going to recapture from necessarily, right?
Sure.
And then on top of that, there's a lot of all these infrastructure and everything. So you know, they're gonna have to meet the city's affordable housing requirement as it pertains to affordable housing. But as Glenn just mentioned, the idea behind this plan is that you have a mixture of housing that are integrated in the fabric of the community, so you don't have standalone units over here, one affordable here.
Ghettos over here and nicer
Yeah,
places over
so
there.
that's the intent, is to kind of intersperse them amongst the entire development process. And if I could respond, you were partly right on the silos, but, and I do want to bring this to your attention, the commission's attention. So over there, there are actually 6 silos.
Yes.
None of those are owned by any of the development prospects or the ownerships upon which the development prospects have contracts.
Yes.
Those are still in ownership of Great Western Sugar. And that's because they actually store sugar there.
It's still functioning as.
Yeah, they bring in bulk there, they store it there until they need to ship it to wherever they're gonna package it, so.
I think we heard from them when we discussed the Fairfield project.
Yeah.
They wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, this was going to continue, and
They're
we're not
there.
going anywhere. I guess my last question then is around timing. You talked about some or much of this land not being under Longmont, the city of Longmont.
The annexation.
Yeah, when does annexation come to the table?
That's a good question. The city has the capability to annex the property unilaterally. It is an enclave. Under that scenario, if it were to be pursued, that's a relatively quick period. If it's still in the hands of the developers and the property owners, it's most probably a 1.5 to 2 years out, because they want to try and get the remediation done prior to the conveyance of the property into their ownership. So that's why it's kind of hard to say where we'll be on the annexation.
Okay. Thanks, Tony.
Commissioner Lukash?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Tony, for bringing this update to us. You mentioned a lot about promoting pedestrian access and pedestrian facilities and bike facilities, so I might have more on that in an email.
Okay, that's fine.
But transit, you know, I live on the east side, you know, maybe a mile or two from this place. We need transit on the east side, on the southeast side. We had the hospital built there. There is no transit, and we all know a hospital should have a transit connection. So I think will be a great opportunity to create a transit path, transit route that will service this, you know, these areas, the steam and the sugar factory, and also go as far east as we can within the city limits. So I would highly suggest looking into that. And I know that's RTD, but maybe we can twist our hand with this.
Yeah, I believe Phil Greenwald's not here to be able to address this, but I do believe there's actually been conversations about that. If you're not aware, they're actually, the state, CDOT, is building a bus commuter service there at 119 and I-25.
The BRT.
The Mustang
Yeah.
service. And so they're actually looking at that serving as a hub from the east, possibly coming back through Longmont to the west.
That'd be great.
And it's important because a lot of that commuter traffic's effectively going through Longmont to Boulder. And so it's a great opportunity to tie it to the Longmont hub, which is intended to go to Boulder.
Yep.
I might add that RTD is doing the peak service study right now, which is possibly an opportunity to have 3 trains in the morning and 3 trains in the evening using the BNSF line. They are looking at a site here as a maintenance facility, but part of the discussion has been it could be both. It could be a platform potentially in the future. They won't give us a timeline on it, but
Well, they gave me
Our
one, they said
lifetime?
50 years.
I don't think they'll even say 50 years. But it's an opportunity to maybe make a step with the rail.
Yeah.
Well, and again, hopefully we can use this plan to our benefit in that capacity, talking to them. to show them the level of development that we're gonna have towards the east, combined with whatever is further out east, to convince them that, yeah, that's a good linkage possibly in that area there.
Yeah. And to tie it with the previous topic that we had about land acknowledgement and the indigenous people on this land, since it seems like the city is the one gearing the development here, right? So could we incorporate some elements or just have a thought when we are designing these sites? Like maybe some buildings should have some indigenous shape, you know, and I don't know how that would look like. Or have some murals, you know,
So-
showcasing the history
So one thing.
of the area.
There's a possibility, and this has been primarily in my mind and for further discussion, is taking one of those older buildings and actually using that as a true history museum. Because right now where the History Museum is incorporated into the museum there down on Quail Road, it's not a lot of space. So it's really hard for them to really show the entire history of the area. So I've been talking to the developer to say, hey, is there the possibility of donating one of these buildings, a historic building, that you could actually go in there and work with the indigenous populations, and particularly our partners, to see if we could actually have a wing of a historical museum that would basically serve their interests and present their story. So that's part of the idea, is kind of incorporating those cultural elements into it. And then you also talk about, you know, recognizing, we're not only recognizing the agricultural heritage, but any heritage there, and any elements that we can incorporate into these public spaces in that regard. That's what we'd be looking to do also.
Yeah, I like that, yeah. So it
But,
sounds
you know,
like you're
that
already
might be,
thinking about it.
that's a good point, that we might look at the plan and incorporate a little more language to include indigenous history of our indigenous populations in addition.
I think this would be a great candidate.
Yeah, yeah.
Particularly because it's close to the St. Vrain, which tended to be a gathering spot. So, yeah.
Yeah, or
think
even,
we
I don't know, I know the sister cities, they've been talking about donating some land to the tribe or something of that sort. So I don't know if this would be an area where they could have some land dedicated to them. I don't know if that's a possibility, but just throwing it out there.
Okay.
Yeah, and signage, wayfinding. I went on a bike ride today on the St. Vrain Greenway.
Did you find
and
out where you were going?
I knew where I was going. That's I knew where I was going before I left the house.
Okay, that's good.
And I knew where the museum was, but otherwise, I was on the Greenway and there was no signage. Hey, here's the museum. Here's the rec center. No signage. So I strongly suggest having a lot of signage, especially when you're building pedestrian and bicycle facilities.
Well, and we see this, kind of the river corridor there, the creek corridor, providing that opportunity for signage, and also Main Street. So again, if we're looking to extend the downtown effectively to the creek, then we should be recognizing places within our boundaries of our downtown area and letting people know how to get there.
Yeah.
We should have signage for every known brewery in the area.
You know where all those.
Well, I know them, but.
Just hop on the trolley.
Oh, hey, that's an idea. I didn't think of that. Much safer, too.
Commissioner Saunders.
Thank you, Chair Poland. Tony, thank you for bringing this. I've been waiting to see this implementation plan come together for several months, if not years.
But just, Amy, remember, it's all about the money.
I know. I would please that you are saying a lot of yes to things that are going to happen instead of no. So this is a huge project, and I know this is a huge project, and Tony and I, Jess, because we've worked on this project with my students last summer. So the students came through, and they worked on this sub area in Sugar Mill properties, coming up with sustainability opportunities and strategies, and presented them to the Historic Preservation Committee so they could see sort of out-of-the-box ideas that students were working on. So I love that we're talking about culture and other ideas that can come in this property that has been sitting for, I've lived in Longmont 25 years and people have not really wanted to do much with it, and all of a sudden there's a lot of activity about it. So I'm very excited. So if we had a work session and you guys were interested, we could bring students to present some of these ideas. There are some professors at CU studying the First and Main project. And they're also studying this sugar factory and steam sub area. So something to put in those Post-its. I love that you guys are bringing up culture because during our studies in the sugar factory, there's actually graffiti culture. You're not allowed to go there, but if you have drones or you get on Instagram, you can see that the youth of Longmont have been layering up different graffiti illegally in the sugar factory. So it is a really, poignant space of culture and community in Longmont. So I have a lot of feedback on that document that you sent. However, could you get me a hard copy of that so that I could write them in there and then give that to you and not do that here?
I'll see if my printer can withstand 250 pages.
With the appendix, because that was not included in the documents that you sent to me, please. No, it wasn't. Nope. We only got to.
There were
it was-
two attachments.
We had 190. Oh, I might have missed it in the first attachment. Sorry.
Yeah, there were two attachments.
Okay.
One was the plan and the other one was the appendix.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm not gonna bother everybody.
But
with that.
we can get you a hard copy.
I would appreciate that
Yeah.
because then I can just put my little notes in and I don't have to do a gazillion emails. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. The timeline that you're gonna take this to council.
We haven't really set that yet.
Okay, good.
There's a number of things we need to get to. The first step would really be, we'll bring the plan to council, but ultimately, we will have to do a referral. Council will have to refer the annexation.
Okay.
But there's a lot of things to work out yet, so
Okay.
I don't have a
I
timeline
appreciate
for
that length of time for me to go through the 400 pages.
Well, and if I could just add to part of the potential delay going to council is in part due to the continuing discussions with the prospective developers about some financial matters and technical matters that we'd have to work through and make sure that the plan is in alignment to be able to accomplish that.
Yep. Perfect. Okay, I'm not quite done yet. Thank you for that. On the interactive map with the planning map where it has, all of the applications going through, there is a PUD straddling Burlington Northern on there, but it's from 2017, so I'm not sure how accurate or what's happening with that.
That's the
It's
mining.
for Irwin Thomas. Is that the mining?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to double check on that. And then that wetland that's not a wetland, is that still not a wetland?
That's something that that's one of the issues we're looking
Okay,
into.
yeah. 'Cause that's why we call it
It-
that, because it is, and there's different entities that have to process through that.
It meets the vegetation requirements to be considered wetland.
Can you show them where that is, where we're talking about it? It's just so everybody knows where that sort of wetland
So
that's not a
it's-
wetland area
It's pretty much this whole area
Okay.
right in here.
along that
on the
train
west
tracks.
end.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Tony.
But the habitat for various species is not there
Yeah.
for wetland basis. But it will have to go through the U.S. Corps of Engineer for a change in status. And so that's what we're working through right now, is how we go about doing that.
All right, thanks for that update. And believe it or not, that's all I have. Thank you for all your hard work.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions? If not, thank you, Tony, for the presentation, and we look forward to more on this.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for sticking around with me for this evening to take it in. Appreciate it.
Okay, so that was item 7C under other business. We have no other business. And so the next item is final call, public invited to be heard. I will open it. Looking around, there doesn't seem to be anybody in the audience, so I will go ahead and close the final call, public invited to be heard. Next item is items from the commission. Commissioner Saunders.
I have one, I'm gonna attempt this land use recognition, but I'm gonna do the, oh, were you gonna do it? I wouldn't, but I'm gonna do the city council one. I mean, I prefer to do ours, but I can't find it, the one that Carmen said. Well, that's the only one that I can pull up and read. Didn't we have one that was more definitive that Carmen just presented to us? I thought so. Okay, so I'm just gonna go with what city council adopted for our land use recognition. We honor the history and living and spiritual connection that the first peoples have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again.
Thank you. Anybody else? Commissioner Goldberg.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I wanted to be able to get out of here quickly, but Jeremy, I think we had a challenging discussion earlier with the public, and as it relates to, I think it was around when folks can come speak at public invited to be heard. And as a result of that, we heard some comments from the public that suggested that we are limiting community feedback and we're reducing public input. We're taking a step in the wrong direction. We're not providing a balanced view, perhaps favoring applicants and hindering the public. Anyways, I think that captures the spirit of some of the feedback we got. I kind of find solace in the fact that I don't think that's what we were doing. I think what we're trying to do is provide legitimacy to the system and to the process. However, there are times when we cannot take public testimony on something that we're going to handle in a quasi-judicial fashion in the future. And so that's just, I think that's a hard or a challenging concept to, just a frustrating concept, I'm sure, for the public to embrace, and I'm empathetic to that, and I'm disappointed in like how it went down today. I could see that the members of the public today felt duped, you know, or like they didn't have their chance. That said, I don't think we're removing the opportunity for the public to learn or communicate their feelings and their perspective. Certainly, we've seen during the actual P&Z meeting when we're dealing with the application, we've seen communities rally together to combine their public invited to be heard time to really kind of grow exponentially their ability to impact us. You know, might not just be 10 people speaking for 5 minutes, but 10 people speaking for 5 minutes in a choreographed like deposition and really, you know, really working to inspire us. And so I've seen where we get hours of testimony before we even deliberate as a commission, and that's very impactful. So I would just encourage those communities who might feel like they just lost an avenue to communicate to us or to share their perspective, but actually there remains that opportunity. But outside of these walls, I think there continue to be options for folks to submit articles and opinions to the Times Call, to post on social media, to visit the Planning and Services Department directly, to make phone calls to staff, and to email and share their documents and have those shared to us at the time that we get the packet, which is the same day that everyone else gets the packet, right? And so while it might feel like the developer has had months to plan and to conspire or connive or work with staff on their presentation, actually they come down, they get their presentation just as the public gets their time to speak as well, and we're all digesting it in real time. We're not part of those meetings beforehand. So I think those are some of the things that give me comfort in our decision today. Jeremy, I don't know if you had any other further thoughts on the legitimacy or the, you know, is this did we take a step in the wrong direction or the right direction here in upholding our process.
I don't know if I can weigh in on that particular aspect from a legal perspective, but I can assure the commission that this wasn't a bylaw change we took lightly. From a legal standpoint, content-based restriction with First Amendment is a huge concern. In general, the First Amendment recognizes the public right to be heard, the right to engage with your government, and right to have, grievances and petition government for change. But there are certain constitutional due process protections that we have to acknowledge and balance with First Amendment concerns. So prior to proposing the bylaw change, I specifically mentioned Commerce City, Glenn mentioned Thornton. We actually had our office had reached out to a listserv of all various municipalities in Colorado, getting their feedback on the bylaw change. I certainly did extensive research. I know that Eugene, the city attorney, did extensive research. So it wasn't something we considered lightly. It just really came down to concerns about liability and legitimacy of quasi-judicial proceedings. And Commissioner Goldberg, I do think you brought up excellent points about how the public can still engage with the Planning and Zoning Commission, even on quasi-judicial matters. And I think I think most of the comments we heard today, from my perspective, in my opinion, were a lot of frustration given the timing, more than anything. Which unfortunately, with Bond Farm likely coming up on PZ's agenda next month, we're kind of limited on what we can do in terms of the bylaw change. So it was unfortunate how everything played out, but I think our hands were kind of tied, at least from our staff perspective.
Commissioner Lukash.
Thank you, Chair Pollan. I wanted to give it another try and follow my fellow Commissioner Saunders and read the land acknowledgement adopted by the City of Longmont. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the first peoples have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that they do not happen again. And then I was going to add something to Commissioner Goldberg's topic about community engagement. Or maybe I have a question, like how can we enhance our community engagement since we have these quasi-judicial matters that we cannot receive feedback ahead of time. So maybe it's not feedback, right? And maybe the answer lies with the question why. Why are these people, these residents, coming to us with these concerns over and over again? My guess is that there is a disconnect with the developer, right? I mean, most likely. So how can we enhance this engagement between developers and the community? If we cannot act on it at this, we have to wait to act on it. How can we enhance the engagement of the public before it gets to us? Can we have more community meetings or, I don't know, but is there something out there?
Where to begin? I will say that in the case of Bond Farms, I don't want to get into too much detail, that developer has had several meetings with groups. In fact, like a 3-hour charrette that our staff went to on a Friday night. So I think they've made a real effort to try and do that. I guess getting back to the public hearing, we value diverse viewpoints. That's what we're all about. But when they come in individually, they're not hearing each other's viewpoints. So I would say the other advantage of that public hearing is you hear everything at once. And so I think, I don't know that the neighbors are really weighing that as an advantage. They're hearing one side. Now, we require a neighborhood meeting. We do them virtually, and some people feel that shuts some folks out. But I will tell you the numbers show that more people participate because it's not at a time You know, they can find a time to fit it in. So how do you do more with a limited number of staff? I will also say philosophically, we've had to give our work plan to the council in the form of Maslow's pyramid, which if you're familiar with that, the base is what you, that's food and shelter, right? That's how you grow. And then from there, you add on to make it a more human experience. And I put at the top of our pyramid, more YIMBYs. I mean, that's what I think is going to make our process better. People that are trusting of staff and the process, that they'll say, I don't have a problem with it because I understand what it is, and I don't need to come to every public invite to be heard. That's the goal for self-actualization there. And somebody mentioned here, like an advocate or a planner in residence. And that's something I've thought about too. We do work with the developer and we work to get them to meet Envision Longmont. But we have different views on staff. So just like a Supreme Court decision, you get the affirmative vote and you get the negative vote, the folks that were against it. I don't know if there's an opportunity to get to that at some point, where you hear different viewpoints on it. I don't know. Those are some things that rattle around in my head.
Speaking of virtual meetings versus in person, do you have any demographics on the people that attend these meetings? Like, are minorities attending these Zoom meetings? Are they being left out?
I couldn't tell you. And again, those invitees are who lives within 1,000 feet. So we could make some rough judgments based on census data, but we don't require anybody to sign up and give us their demographic background.
I'm just thinking of, you know, an equity perspective and maybe even seniors, you know, they might not know how a Zoom works, you know, and
Right.
or they might, but then they have trouble calling in, which we've seen that when we were doing
Yeah.
our meetings online. So, and I don't know, is there any thought of going back to in person or have hybrid?
We haven't considered it.
Because I personally, I would strongly suggest, you know, having it hybrid at this point.
Yeah, we just have technological issues with the hybrid
Or
meetings.
just go back to in person how we used to do it.
You do one or the other, right?
Right. So maybe give it some thought on that.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Okay, that's it for items from the commission. Items from the Council of Representative Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Poland. First of all, as always, thank you all for your service. I just wanted to say that I definitely will take the conversation regarding your decision as far as your bylaws are concerned when we take up the similar concept on Tuesday night. And then just a little bit of an opinion also on kind of the participation question that was kind of posed by Commissioner Lukacs, is that we've had in other circumstances, so not to dive into the weeds of specific planning and zoning type issues, but for instance, with our recent decision about banning dogs at Button Rock Preserve, there was a lot of comments from the public saying, we never heard about this, you're doing this with no notification. And Councilmember Waters specifically asked David Bell, how many public meetings did we have? How many years have we been talking about this? And, you know, we're talking years of meetings and probably at least, at the very least, 6 public meetings that were specifically on this on this type or on the subject. And until it hits somebody's radar, you could have 1,000 public meetings and they're not going to know about it. And it's kind of the same thing, I think, especially when you get to development issues, is because they're not gonna worry about what our code says or what Envision Longmont says until there's a development going in their neighborhood, right? And so, again, we could have 1,000 meetings and we're not gonna catch enough people to fully realize the education of the public that I think that we would all really prefer to happen. So that's just kind of my opinion on this, because city council gets it all the time. Oh, you just started installing smart meters and you didn't ask anybody about it. Well, we had years and years of meetings and had to allocate funding for this, so sorry you didn't know about it till just now, you know? And so it's a tough question, and you know, I always advocate for doing as much outreach as possible in as many different ways as possible, be it social media, be it at public functions, and those kinds of things. So I feel the frustration. I share that with you. So thank you all. This was a good meeting.
Okay, items from Planning Director Glenn Van Nimwegen.
I did want to mention a couple of scheduling things. So, as Jeremy mentioned, we expect Bond Farms to be before you on June 21st.
I'll be on vacation.
Set your vacation right now. One thing we think would really be advantageous is to start early at 6 and start with a site visit. So we would like to do that as a group, and then we would start the staff presentation at the site. So we are working on the details there and then reconvening back here for the rest of the meeting, basically. So we want to know, and I think we try and feed you too, so we'd like to maybe start the meeting like 5:30, grab something to eat, get on a bus, and meet out at Bond Farms, because I know none of you have visited it because it's a quasi-judicial site. So this will be the first time, and you haven't looked at it on Google either, I'm sure, so.
So you'll tell us in advance where it is, and there'll be appropriate kinds of facilities? I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Commissioner Saunders.
Thank you, Chair Poland. So that brings up the issue of accessibility and making it so that anyone in the public can come, correct? Because if
They-
you're starting a public meeting there, right?
Right.
And presenting evidence,
Right.
right? So everybody's gonna go, so parking, where it's gonna be, all of those things, the logistics will be sorted out before then.
They will have to get themselves there.
Well, sure, like
Right.
myself, because as an alternate, you're not, providing for the alternates, you're providing for whoever's sitting, correct? For meals and transportation for the commission.
Right.
But the citizens, when I'm not on here, I'm a citizen, citizens can still go, yes?
It would be part of the,
Right.
the
yeah.
agenda would say
Yeah.
6 to 7 p.m. is going to be at this location.
Sure, and then we'd come back here for the rest of it, is that what you're saying? And so you'd have to wait for all the citizens to also get here too, who wanted to be here. Yeah. Yeah.
Should be
And
walking.
Amy will also be there, so you're gonna have to wait for me and find a parking spot, because I don't live there, I'm not gonna have my driveway. I'm gonna have to find a place to park. So just this one citizen is interested where I'm gonna park and how I'm gonna get there, cause I want to go and be a part of this. So
It's
I'm just
tough being a
one, I
citizen.
know, I know, you guys make it tricky, but I don't want you to make it tricky, I want you to make it easy and accessible as well, right? I mean, if you're, we also have, some accessible needs, and
Yes.
we'll have to make accessible needs for our citizens as well. So if they need to contact you to make those mobility issues available, there'll have to be some time frame on that too. Sorry not to be a pain, but that, I'm just thinking, getting myself there. And my friends.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Glenn, I love it. I think that's really innovative for us. I don't know how many times we've done an off-site visit and/or an off-site meeting, an actual meeting. So I just applaud you and staff for taking the extra effort there.
I will give credit to the city attorney's office who thought that would be a good idea, and I think we embrace it too.
Commissioner Lukash.
Thank you, Chair Poland. I was going to comment on the same topic. Having the site visit, I know I brought this up whenever we went through our bylaws initially in February. So I know it's innovative and it's something new for us, so it will be interesting to see how it goes and maybe apply this format for other developments. So thank you for that. And yeah, with the transportation, so are you providing transportation for the commission from here?
That's the
With
plan.
a bus? Okay.
Yeah. Also on the agenda, we think we'll have something on June 28th as well. So look at your calendars for that. Right now, we potentially are open on July 19th. And we suspect that perhaps the Kanemoto project would come forward 1 week later. We are waiting on the Board of County Commissioners to make a final decision on the conservation overlay, so that could affect that, that timing. And then we have something for August 16th. But just want to let you know, the summer is getting rapidly booked up. July, 26th, right. So normally it'd be 19th, July 19th, but we think that potentially could be open. But we won't really know until the beginning of July when.
The county commission.
Right. That's it from me.
That's
I'm
it?